You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Detective William Somerset is looking for a way out.
You're retiring. 6 more days and you're all the way gone.
So how long have you been here?
Too long. Detective David Mills is looking for a way in.
We'll be spending every waking hour together from now until the time I leave. I'll show you who your friends and enemies are.
Look, I'm gonna come back 5 years. Not here.
We were just making sure there was adequate closet space.
Good. This house is yours if you want it.
We'll take it.
Okay. It's just me.
You didn't see it, did you? You didn't see it, did you? You didn't see it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on. Invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature Grindhouse style where we discuss 2 films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are talking one of the best mustaches in the game, and I'll just leave it at that for now. So join the sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patrons or subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for, we're in our 7th year of bonus episodes. There's like 180, 190, I think we're coming up on, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films, which there's over 50 coming up on 60 of. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast, we'd recommend doing that. And we had a bunch of people make the jump this week. We're going to give them their shout outs real quick. We had Justin Teekgraber, we had Sasha, we had Hardcore Virgin, Aaliyah, Dan Bowling, LP, Riley Urbano, Daniel Nagorny, Chase Ward, Stephen Regalia, Old Man Gloom, Frank Volk, who actually signed up for at the annual tier, got an entire year of the show. You get a little bit of a monthly discounted rate if you do that. We had Adam Warble show up, Josh Slater Williams, Pizza Lawyer 420, Warwick Stinson, Christopher Fitzpatrick, Nick Hender, Ryan, Uberlane Gizbar, and last but not least, Jake. So thanks so much to all of you folks. Hope you're enjoying all those bonus episodes, and we appreciate the support.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, everybody.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, make sure to give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything you guys can think of. And you freaks have thought of a lot of stuff. You have bought notebooks, you have bought hoodies, coffee mugs. If you're interested in anything like that, the link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back another week. As always, I'm your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over here on the main feed would have heard from us, where we would have had special returning guest Andrew Law of the Bunta Vista podcast back on to do a double feature of ultra-violent men on a mission films. We talked about the Hong Kong martial arts legend Sammo Hung doing his heroic bloodshed and almost kung fu version of a maximalist Rambo-esque Vietnam War action spectacle, Eastern Condors from 1987. And then we paired it with the much typically classier Powell and Pressburger cinematographer Jack Cardiff's surprisingly nasty and gruesome Dirty Dozen-inspired Congo crisis adventure pulp film Dark of the Sun from 1968.
Yes, which does feature a very well photographed chainsaw fight, which is just absolutely incredible. And Sammo Hung is doing full-on gunfighting and Rambo scenes where he's screaming and shooting a machine gun for way too long. It's fantastic in Eastern Condors, so check both of them out for sure.
Yeah, so I haven't heard that episode again 2 weeks ago over on the main feed with Andrew. Go back and check that out. But then last week over on the Patreon, exclusively for the patrons, we wanted to talk about, finally, some 90s Cold War submarine thrillers that both went on to become some pretty dad-core cable classics. We talked about John McTiernan's very sturdy and effective adaptation of Tom Clancy's debut Jack Ryan novel, The Hunt for Red October from 1990, starring Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin. and we paired it with Tony Scott's more cramped and stylized Crimson Tide from 1995 with Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman, of course, R.I.P. And we had a lot of fun breaking down the sort of military protocol and ethics and how to turn that into almost a thriller, and also like a Kane Mutiny sort of like courtroom duel on top inside the submarine.
Yeah, and really cool too to see that specific setting done with two very different approaches, kind of having more of an ensemble and then the other one being more of like just two powerhouse performances going bat to bat. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so you haven't heard that episode, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was the bonus episode. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest joining us. He is the cinema studies teacher at the University of Toronto. He is one of the very best working film critics and writers for such places as The Ringer and Sight and Sound. He's also a wonderful author of many beautiful coffee table books on the Coen brothers, Paul Thomas Anderson, and most recently, David Fincher, Mind Games, which I can't recommend enough to anyone if you haven't picked it up yet still. It is a wonderful companion to go through as you revisit Fincher films, which I compulsively rewatch the same way they are obsessively constructed. That guest is Mr. Adam Nayman. Adam, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Shouts to Old Man Gloom. I hope wherever Old Man Gloom is, he or they are well.
Yeah. We are very happy to have you back, Adam. And when I reached out to you about what you wanted to talk about, you hit me with a movie I had never seen before. One I knew I'd probably get around to eventually, but it wasn't exactly what I was expecting you to pitch when we were like, and we kind of love that. We love that when we throw something at a guest and they come at us with something we don't expect. But then we were also like, okay, how can we tie in what everyone wants out of you? So So what two films are we talking about today, and what do you think unites them, other than Adam likes them both?
Should we do the common denominator first, or the films? I mean, the films we're going to talk about are David Fincher's Seven, and I note with some astonishment, unless I got this wrong, not only that you haven't done that film, but you've somehow not done David Fincher, which I think is to your credit, because he is arguably quite over-discussed, not just by me, but by the culture. But your timing is good, because supposedly he's going to direct a sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, written by Quentin Tarantino. If you believe this, I have a tariff to sell you.
I'll believe it when World War Z2 comes out, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and
Strangers on a Train.
Mindhunter season 3.
So, somehow you guys haven't touched on Fincher, who is sort of one of the defining 21st century mainstream genre filmmakers. But I say kudos to you for not doing him, because he's talked about a lot, right? So that was the one where I guess me coming on makes sense because of the book, and because it's the 30th anniversary of Seven, and it just came out in a sort of interesting re-release. Everything with Fincher is always about, little changes to color grading and these tiny switches to the visual scheme of the movie.
Turning a light bulb on in the background.
We talk about that. But the movie that I wanted to talk about, which was not Seven, although I'm happy to talk about Seven, is another music video director with what we might call a sort of very late 90s visual style. I wouldn't call him a Fincher acolyte, but I think he was sort of like, we had David Fincher at home in that period, which is Mark Pellington, the director of the Mothman Prophecies, which I wanted to do because I watched it randomly one night this past January. I've always liked it, but it was cold. I was in a bad mood. I said this on Letterboxd. I actually was looking for something to enhance a kind of like fairly bad mood. Nothing terrible in life, but just like a shitty day. And I really was taken by it on a 23 years later rewatch as a pretty successfully gloomy, unsettling, existential kind of creep out, And Pellington is definitely from that same wing of the music video director turned filmmaker family as as Fincher, and I think that they make for an interesting pair because arguably they are both films about pieces coming together. They address it very differently, but I think we'll have a fun compare and contrast.
There's definitely some realizations that the protagonist of each film, I think, goes through because they're structured like procedural mysteries, but use the vocabulary of kind of horror to kind of get their way there. And obviously the visual and sonic tool belt of the music video aesthetic, those guys were definitely a part of.
And I hope we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about Pellington as a music video director because, you know, Fincher gets discussed a lot in that sense. But Pellington made some pretty important early 90s promo clips. So, you know, hopefully we'll have some time to dig into that.
For sure. No, I can't wait to, because he's, you know, I've definitely went down the rabbit hole of watching Fincher ones, and Pellington is just a filmmaker I'm not as familiar with, so I haven't done that trip the same way I have done even with like a Joseph Kahn, who we talked about with the extended clip guys a few weeks ago. I was like, there's a guy who his music videos are I kind of grew up on a little bit. But yeah, other than a sort of degree of separation in aggressiveness and unpleasantness, there is some similarities going on between these two films I'm excited to get into. So let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's kick things off here. We'll go chronologically. We will first talk about what the people want to hear. Seven.
He's 2 murders away from completing his masterpiece.
Let's finish it.
Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. 7.
All right, we are talking about Seven, the 1995 American serial killer neo-noir horror procedural directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, and starring Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt as both the veteran and rookie homicide detectives Somerset and Mills, who I'm sure, as most people already know, land a particularly horrifying case of a serial killer who weaponizes the 7 deadly sins as his motivation for an elaborate murder spree. And as Nayman has already mentioned, yes, believe it or not, this is somehow our first time talking about Colorado-born music video director turned obsessively stylized crime thriller filmmaker Mr. David Fincher, frequently also a thriller filmmaker of serial killers, or at least associated with that, and the sort of psychological profile and procedure of those that are drawn to hunting them down. Nayman, in his book, made a great comparison between the idea of the filmmaker as a serial killer and the critic as the profiler who's sifting through all the clues he's leaving behind. And Fincher obviously behind many films that I'm sure you have all heard of: Fight Club, Gone Girl, Zodiac, The Game, Dragon Tattoo, more recently something like The Killer, and also a few sort of ostensible outlier dramas and biopics: The Social Network, Benjamin Button, Mank, a few Netflix series you may have heard of as well: House of Cards, Mindhunter. And we could not be happier to have saved it to be talking about this man with the man who quite literally recently wrote the book. So, Adam, not to take too much advantage of you or pass all of my own work on to you, but this is usually the part where I just yap for a few minutes about the biographical background that paved the way to the film that we're talking about. So maybe if we have even one listener out there who hasn't heard your Fincher primer that you would give to your students on day one, where did this guy come from? What makes him so special that we all know his name? And it almost seems silly to think that there are people that don't.
I mean, Fincher is part of this wave of, I would say, like small screen expressionists, you know, or small screen auteurs in the 80s. The first wave of them are very British. You know, they're either filmmakers under the sign of Ridley Scott, or literally Ridley Scott, or Ridley's brother Tony. But, you know, you also have the Hugh Hudsons and Adrian Lyons of the world, this sort of British invasion of TV commercial adepts and music video adepts making films. And I think that this was something where the UK really had the market cornered for a little bit. And then you started seeing stirrings of this in the US with, you know, similarly this kind of like little cohort or a group of music video directors. Fincher helped to create a company called Propaganda with some other directors, you know, in their 20s who were in demand in MTV and from various advertising firms. You know, I believe Dominic Senna was one of them, you know, creating what Fincher called at the time a jukebox, which really got at the mercenary aspect of what they did. He had a line about Propaganda where he's like, you put your quarter in one end and the video where the ad comes out the other. So that idea of just pure style and technique and often abstraction where the product really didn't matter as much as the hard sell. And I think that like the very first thing Fincher made, which was this PSA for the American Cancer Society, where he took the Star Child from 2001 and like basically put it inside a scan of a pregnant woman's belly and the fetus is smoking a cigarette, which if you believe in the idea of like compression or brevity, like it might be the best thing Fincher's ever made. It's just so incredibly striking and kind of caustic, and you can see a lot of not just the Kubrick worship there, but even things like the treatment of the cancer support group in Fight Club. Like they all kind of come from that, right? So the PSA gets the point across, but it's also just a flex from the filmmaker. So he makes some music videos that really show off this gift for abstraction, like these beer commercials where they seem to be selling everything except beer. You know, they're like selling masculinity, or they're selling, you know, a kind of like urban dystopia. The product is secondary. Where he really comes into his own as an auteur, even before he's a filmmaker, is the work he does with Madonna, where you even have Madonna talking about it in terms of like, he's my little Joseph von Sternberg, and I'm, you know, Marlene Dietrich. And you have these videos that obviously speak to real cinematic ambitions. They have references to Fritz Lang. They have references to Orson Welles. They completely help Madonna consolidate her image at that moment. That
I mean, the work he did on Vogue is insane.
Vogue and Express Yourself, those aren't the only Madonna personas. I mean, she's done so many great music videos, but they're pretty iconic, you know? Mm-hmm. And he also had a brilliant video for the Rolling Stones where he sort of used forced perspective to make them look like Godzilla stomping all over a city, which speaks to their size, but also this joke about them being dinosaurs in the 90s, you know, because they're old and they're doing Love is Strong. It's kind of like the Rolling Stones become Jurassic Park. I mean, you could go through all these music videos, but just based on the videos, he's kind of like a great filmmaker. There's one year at the MTV Awards, I think, where between Madonna, someone else, and of course Don Henley for End of the Innocents, he had 3 of the 4 Best Director nominations at the MTV Awards. So that chapter in 1 year. So like that chapter of Fincher's career is that idea that he's really helping to shape pop culture, but he's shaping it in a form that doesn't get a lot of critical acclaim. You know, he's seen as mercenary. So you have him get this incredible opportunity to make Alien 3, a movie that lives
Would
in
he
infamy.
Describe it that way?
Well, he hates that movie, and he's been very staunch about disliking it. I mean, we could completely
what's his line? What's the famous line? Is it the colon cancer? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, he likes to make jokes about cancer, but he's basically, you know, I'd rather a colon cancer than make another movie after that.
Yeah, he had a lot of studio and producer interference that resulted in that movie coming out.
Well, David Giller, he's one of the bigwigs of the Alien franchise, supposedly it was either a meeting or a conference call. He called Fincher a shoe salesman, which was, you know, quite cutting. And I think that it put a big chip on Fincher's shoulder. I mean, he didn't write Alien 3, but he shaped it, and it's a movie that has such bad vibes towards the franchise. Like, it kills off these beloved characters in the first 2 minutes, and for the whole rest of the movie, I mean, this is a simplification of Alien 3, but the whole movie is Ripley being like, there can't be more aliens. There could be no more. This is the last one, which is a narrative about the creature, but it's also about trying to, like, kill this franchise a little bit. I mean, we could totally detour and talk about Alien 3 for hours. There are making of documentaries about the film, but suffice it to say, big opportunity, big exposure, not a flop. And some of the early reviews were positive. Like if we're talking about who is the herald of David Fincher, even Amy Taubin from the very beginning reviewing Alien 3 was like, this guy's a great filmmaker, But it didn't connect like Alien and Aliens had. It was seen as sour and grotesque. It went through so much development and rewriting even before Fincher got it. It was always going to be a bit of a convoluted film.
Well, and it was also a guy who would obviously become known for being such a fussy control freak kind of guy. And to have his first experience be as probably the extreme of the opposite of that you can experience, of having so much interference. He was said to like not read a script for like a year after that, because he was like, the idea that's what making a movie is. I didn't know I'm going to make music videos like that.
Well, there were these set visit features where you could feel the crew and the actors being pulled apart, like not just that they were divided 50-50, but they all seemed divided as individuals on Fincher, where you'd have people be like, this guy's a great director, but they're like saying it through their teeth, or Sigourney Weaver saying, I'll do whatever he says, but also being like, this kind of sucked. And I don't know. I mean, it come back in our minds, to the early 90s. When I was 10 or 11 when that movie came out, giant franchise event movies like this were rarer. The property was really valuable. We didn't have a million different Alien spin-offs or whatever else. I mean, there was a lot of expectation, and I think it underperformed and really just bad vibes. And you're right that he really wanted control, and I think he's always talked about how he kind of wanted to come on and have things his way. I mean, he's 27 years old. So there's like a virtuosity there and a hubris as well. Mm-hmm. And Seven, there's so many things that go into him making this movie, but the big one is the desire in interviews, a desire to downsize. And I think the grotesqueness and the sadism of the material is appealing to him. We didn't know yet that he was going to be the reigning, auteur of serial killer movies. We didn't know what a kind of sick fuck director he was, because the Alien movies are grim, but they're grim by their nature as like sci-fi horror movies, Mm-hmm. Seven is where the real idea of Fincher as a kind of sadist comes from. But I think it just was he had control because it's a small movie. And
he read a script that he felt, I think, would alienate people who would who would think it was like an evil script and wouldn't want to work on it. He was like, by virtue of that, this isn't going to be a movie that has Gene Hackman in it, or isn't going to have like Stallone and Pacino and all these names who were floating around it, who were like, nah, that's an evil movie. I don't want to touch that movie. And they had Andrew Walker Kevin do 10 drafts of that or whatever to try and like mute that aspect of the movie, and he was like, no, we're doing the first one.
There is a real irony to him coming back into filmmaking with this film, and because of the material, because he liked the grotesque and the grit and kind of the despair of it all a little bit, and then they were trying so hard to change that ending, especially. I mean, they were trying to change other things too, because there's a lot of just unbelievably disgusting stuff in this, but they were really trying to change the ending, which is, at this point, especially, 30 years later, I guess, is one of the most famous endings in cinema history for our generation anyway. So it's... and
important, I think, because there's so much to drill down into with Seven, but just as a kind of panorama of the time, this is post Silence of the Lambs. Right?
Yep.
So not just the commercial viability of Thomas Harris in a serial killer movie, but a very particular angle on one, where you sort of have the serial killer as not just something to pursue, but this kind of guru-like figure, Hannibal Lecter had drawn on real-life figures, but he's such a fantasy creation. He's like a supreme intelligence. He's the in a way, like the moral conscience of Silence of the Lambs in an odd way. So Seven is being released into a Silence of the Lambs zeitgeist, an American Psycho zeitgeist, and the increasing also popularity of like TV investigation procedurals. There's a period of Homicide: Life on the Street, and NYPD Blue and a lot of handheld camera work. It's like a perfect storm of surrounding factors.
Yeah, you can see exactly why New Line read it and was like, we know what we can shape this into. Like, there is so much potential. And, you know, like, obviously, the fact that they committed to the version of it that is so gruesome and so perverse and so Fincher, and it still was a blockbuster movie that grossed over $300 million is kind of insane. But you can see, just looking at the Walker Kevin script that landed on Fincher's lap, that it, you know, it has this very grim, high concept, you know, cop procedural, you know, element to it, obviously with this kind of conservative leaning urban hellhole aspect from, you know, a guy who grew up in the suburbs who moved to New York City and was like, oh, there's crime here. But it's just also filled with all kinds of, and to credit, you know, Walker Kevin as well, like just really, really, you know, pulpy shocks and kind of an intriguing, like almost like dorm room philosophical misanthropic pretension to it. And it's all this kind of stuff that I think in someone else's hands you'd maybe be saying as a negative thing. But in Fincher's, there's something so interesting about how he really did latch on to the zeitgeist of the serial killer as this gravitational thing that pulls you in and makes it, and plays with the fact that what if that character is this eccentric trickster, gruesome showman who, you know, like has that line about how you got to hit people over the head with a sledgehammer to get their attention. And you have a director who's a young hotshot music video director who's capable behind the camera, who, you know, is hungry to prove something about himself. And I think you just got kind of the best of both worlds by doing that. You have a script that has this gimmicky movie of the week genre screenwriting appeal that a studio would love, and a guy who actually wants to pull every artistically grim and edgy bit of intensity that he can kind of pull out of it. And I'll be honest, that was what stood out to me the very first time I ever watched it as a teenager, when I looked up fucked up movie probably on the internet. And I was like, what is, you know, like that's, and it was the forbidden adult movies hidden in my dad's like VHS drawer. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And when I watched this, I still am absolutely enthralled by just the apocalyptic, like sick puppets on a gross stage vision of what he's doing here in terms of the neo-noir serial killer procedural as horror film. It's dingy, it's rotten, there's an ambience to it that I just find repulsive, but at the same time, in the same way that cop procedurals are to a lot of people who watch them every week, there's something weirdly comforting and kind of alluring that does make me kind of go, I'm going to watch Seven again. And I'm like, I don't know what that is.
The sledgehammer line that you quoted, that's where I started in writing about the film in the book. And not so much the sledgehammer, but that idea of the director and the killer as being aligned. And that idea of needing attention in a kind of desensitized moment. Because, I mean, I'm assuming most people who are listening to this pod have seen Seven. I feel like the statute of limitations is 30 years for spoilers, you know. But you have a character who's physically absent for most of the movie and then present in a way that's very unexpected. He is elusive and cannot be caught until he walks into their police station. Which I'm going to go on a limb and say it's not just a great ending. It's one of the best twists in any movie. Yeah. And you know it's a great twist because Skyfall stole it and The Dark Knight stole it. And a lot of movies have what I call the seven twists, which is 2/3 of the way through the killer or the antagonist, you know, walks through the door and lets himself get caught. And he's like, but I've got something really bad, you know, and Seven did that well. But John Doe, as someone who is interested in getting people's attention, not so much making a rhetorical point as using aesthetics as a kind of rhetoric, you know, like the art speaks for itself. Each of these crime scenes are tableaus. They are stage management. They are direction. They are little self-contained vignettes. You could almost call them advertisements. And my big, I wouldn't say galaxy brain, I think it's a serious way of looking at Fincher. He is a guy who thematizes advertising and media and messaging in all of his movies. It's the most interesting thing about him. is how much of, as a filmmaker, he is about semiotics and communication and what it means to take and hold people's attention and to use either very cryptic or very direct methods of communication. So whatever the intent is, I think John Doe as an analog for Fincher makes an awful lot of sense. And that idea of how you get people's attention when everything is so grotesque, you have to go above and beyond, but also with a little bit of elegance, I think is his kind of calling card. And that's where the tension in Seven comes from, because I'm interested to hear how you guys respond to this, but I think it's really important to say this up top. The movie works because you do not want them to stop him. If they stop him, the movie is not enjoyable. You have one crime per day, and you really want to figure out what's going on, but you don't want this to be disrupted. The pleasure, whether you know it or not, and it's a very demagnetized moral compass of a movie, you're like, I want to see this get finished.
Yeah,
I want I want the painting to be complete. I don't want to miss the last room in the installation. However you want to analogize it to art.
Yeah, there's a satisfaction to the puzzle pieces coming together, right?
and it's an aesthetic, conceptual satisfaction. It's completely divorced from morality, which is why I think the movie, I'm saying this about a movie that in some ways I think is quite juvenile, but like, it's about the satisfaction of art because it is completely divorced from morality. On a moral level, what he's doing is not just repulsive and criminal. I mean, it's very upsetting what he does, and we don't feel good about how the omelet gets made, like which eggs he breaks to make the omelet. You're like, what an asshole. But the movie
and you're repulsed
good.
by it, but you're right that like it feels possessed by the malevolent purpose. There's a momentum. There's like you're satisfyingly observing these aftermaths like they are these horrifyingly beautiful sort of like art installations before they get put into their kind of predetermined place. And the movement of them and the organization of it is clearly with the glee of a filmmaker who consciously or not definitely finds kinship with the exacting nature of this showman as murderer, right? With 30 years later, I kind of expected the look at me show-offy nature of it to maybe even be something that I found a little bit annoying or contradictory about the movie, but I don't. I never do. I'm just like, this perfectly suits the subject of a killer who is doing the same thing to these detectives he's trying to trap and trying to stage this master plan he wants them to be impressed by.
Well, and you look at a movie that's made around the same time, which would seem like an odd comparison, and I think these filmmakers approach everything about genre from a different place. But I mean, you think about a movie like Funny Games, where the entire movie is basically turning to the camera and being like, "You're an asshole for watching this," and if you don't want to see what's going to happen, turn the movie off. And there's something very pedantic about that and very academic and intellectual about it. But Seven is dealing in a similar game of complicity, whether it's hyper-conscious or not, which is, I mean, why are you watching? I think it's dangling the idea that we're watching because it's nice to see the cops catch and stop a bad guy. But I think that that's a pretty flimsy alibi for why we're watching the movie. You are given 7 days, you are given 7 crimes, you are given the idea of random victims, and I guess a little suspense hinges on whether the cops will become victims or who else is going to sort of be killed. But it is all predicated.
And you're given some of the stock buddy camaraderie of like, you know, Pitt as the, you know, hot-headed rookie and Morgan Freeman as the world-weary veteran passing on his wisdoms. And there is some, I think, joy taken in the fact that these two guys comically differ in just like everything from intellect to curiosity to impulse, temperament, moral worldview, and everything like that. But I do always appreciate that in a Fincher movie, he does make time for conversation and introspection, and you know, it is important to have an interlude to those horrors. He has characters. I think about Zodiac all the time. There's so many characters eating food and doing the grunt work and talking about their view on life or literature or things. And so he likes to make time for that stuff. But in this case, there's something more perverse about it because he makes time for it only so that it feels so much worse when you have to go back to the more sadistic elements that are on display in this film, I think.
Yeah, it's also...
Well, there's go on. Go on.
I was going to say just on your point about how kind of disgusting it is to watch this in general, the second time especially feels more sadistic of a watch, because you already know that this is completely doomed. You can kind of, you can trick yourself into whatever when you watch it the first time and maybe you don't know the twist ending, but knowing exactly how this ends, how gruesome it is, and how really no one comes out a winner, you are just watching a doomed ticking time bomb the entire time, and it just gets more and more gruesome. And I also do love the idea that we kind of, when we're watching it, have this almost animalistic thing about us when we're watching it, where we're like, well, I can't turn it off now. There's still 3 sins left to discover. There's 3 more crime scenes that I need to see how this guy represented each sin. And there is that kind of impulse that you have, I think, when you're watching it, and unfortunately, maybe. But I do like the mix of, there's like simplicity, obviously, and just marking off 7 deadly sins and kind of having almost these chapters built into it. But I do like, speaking on the doomed feeling of the film, how when you're watching it the second, third, or fourth time, you can kind of see it within each character, specifically Brad Pitt's character, because of all the like emotional outbursts that he has. They seem so much more apparent and honestly sad and like warnings than they do the first time around. He just seems like a hothead that first time, but those second, third times, you're like, dude, you need to calm down, because if you don't, his whole plan is going to come to fruition, kind of thing. And you see a little bit more complexity in their characters, actually, the more you watch.
I have grown to really have a lot of affection for the Brad Pitt character watching. I know agree. That there's a common, I think, critique of the movie out there, that Brad Pitt is a little, he's deliberately trying to shake up his image. He's maybe a little in over his head. He's directed, I think, to be a little bit boyish and to be a little bit immature, and in a way that I think leads to, you get these moments of vulnerability that border on a little embarrassing, I think, to watch of this character, especially when you get to the big finale for him. But the fact that I never realized when I was younger that his character is positioned as genuinely having, like, yes, he arguably, in comparison to the Morgan Freeman character, is naive, and that's his view of that character, but in a way that is genuinely kind of heroic, or in a way that should be heroic. Yes. He should be rewarded for. And the point of the movie, obviously, is that he is viciously punished for that. But I forgot how many times he actually challenges the fact that, the Somerset character, the more world-weary guy, who, for me, plays a lot more like Cormac McCarthy's Sheriff Bell in No Country for Old Men, where he's very much this kind of confused, defeated, helpless in the face of all this senseless stuff. He views his job as a police officer more as being a witness or a janitor. He has that fantastic monologue about, we're collecting all the evidence and taking all the pictures and the samples and writing everything down, and just the putting everything in neat little piles, and how the what he feels is the pointlessness of that's inspiring his retirement. But I had forgotten on how often Brad Pitt's character kind of goes, that apathy is very, very similar worldview to someone who would go around killing people because they think the world is a rotten trash heap that can't be fixed. Mm-hmm. And I can't do my job and believe things the way that you believe them. And I think that actual element of it is a little bit more intelligent than I remembered when I watched it when I was younger. And I was like, crazy, sick murders.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's just his refusal to give up that kind of that heroic personality, even though it's completely lost in this world that David Fincher has created. It just doesn't make any sense in like visually, the way that he goes, like the way even he's presented as a character when he shows up like late to the first crime scene and stuff. Like he's putting on a character. You can see his character do that, putting on a pseudo character.
He's framed from the very first scene. He says Serpico's got to go to work. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
He's someone who has, and Serpico is right in the sweet spot of David Fincher's film viewing. I mean, if you look at Fincher's list of the best movies ever made, they're all made between 1967 1978, and I don't even think that Seven has a lot of 70s cosplay in it. I think that it's, as Richard Dyer wrote about it, it's like more of a 40s movie overlaid on the 90s. But Fincher loves those new Hollywood narratives and these flawed heroes, and he's really interested in that idea of systemic corruption and almost kind of Polanskian feeling of, that the world is just kind of rotten from the inside out, and the more not just naive, but the more idealistic you are, you kind of, get punished in proportion to that. But what you said, JB, is interesting about the Freeman character, because I tried to write about this in the book. The script is very careful to point out that Somerset and John Doe, they really understand each other. Mm-hmm. And it's just a differing degree of, let's say, enthusiasm or disgust, but they fundamentally see the world the right way, the same way, which is why it's a miracle that the movie has the coherence that it does. Because if you read about the making of it, there were all kinds of additional character beats with Somerset that kind of got lost, and character beats with Doe that got lost. Of course, the ending was reshot and re-storyboarded and rewritten enough times that all of those parallels and all of that coherence was right on the verge of not just being compromised, but just like being gone. And I think that Seven is a really interesting case of a film that editing and revising are part of filmmaking, Not all masterpieces are fully formed and coherent from the beginning. This movie is very close in its backstory to like being kind of bad. Mm-hmm. No matter what film stock they use, no matter how good the casting is, no matter how awesome the score is and Nine Inch Nails are, there's a version of this movie that sucks. And the instincts of the filmmakers, a lot of it was in post-production and in script development, and things that aren't very romantic, things that kind of push against the conception we have that movies are these fully formed works of genius and just conceptually perfect. Seven kind of got saved. I mean, I don't know if people know about the original ending. I don't know if people know about the framing device where you had Somerset like Gene Hackman in Unforgiven, building a house, or there's one version of the ending where it's Freeman who shoots Spacey. That came all from the same smart guys.
Paltrow and
they saved Paltrow. Like that's the same Andrew Kevin Walker who wrote the script. That's the same David Fincher who directed it. There's a real fortuitousness that this is the version that came together in the editing. But that said, in its final form, shorn of all of those additional materials, it's pretty much a perfect movie. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it is. It doesn't have an ounce of fat. It doesn't have a single performance that doesn't work. And the pace of it, I've watched this on a big screen a few times with the Fincher, touring the Fincher book, especially watching it on film. You could hear a pin drop. And this is people who've seen it before, It is one of the best paced movies of its kind that you will ever see.
Yeah, and it does feel like one of those movies you never know what you're going to pick up the third, fourth time. And I had like the pacing is unbelievable, to be honest. It's one of those over 2 hour movies that just does not feel like it whatsoever. And I'm not trying to throw any shade before we talk about it, but Mothman, which is a very similar time, it does kind of, you start to feel it a little more just in the sense of it's doing similar things where it is going from like scene to scene, much like this. It just doesn't do it in quite an interesting way. We'll get to it, but
I think it's just not motivated by the same sense of purpose. I really do think that Fincher is so motivated by the architecture of what it is that this killer is doing, and in perversely staging it against the protagonists of his movies, who are the people sifting through it and trying to figure it out. And I was lucky to see it recently on film as well. I think just maybe a year or two ago, and that was maybe the first time where even also just having the sound, and it was really the first time I had picked up on the fact, this is like a Howard Shore score, the same as which having seen Silence of the Lambs recently on a print as well, I was like, the mood and momentum of both of those films is like so motivated by specifically what he's doing, but the entire tech team. Like you have Darius Kanji shooting the movie, who had a lot of notoriety at the time for the more gorgeously eccentric imagery for the French filmmakers Jean-Pierre Junot and Marc Caro. We talked about Delicatessen, for example, in the show, and funny enough, went on to do Alien 4 for a little bit of a connection there, and went on to be obviously the DOP for Haneke and James Gray, and recently Bong Joon-ho and the Safdies. And it was just like the inky and dark noir look of this, but also specifically the blurry, like shallow focus and the kind of like vomit shaded like color palette of the whole thing. The way that he is able to shoot downtown LA and it somehow looks like the same rain-soaked evil streets of something like Taxi Driver is really, really impressive. And having seen Heat recently, where they're shooting also downtown LA, I was like, no two movies have ever looked different. So different from each other. This movie looks like just putrid and purgatorial and decaying at all times, and it's so wet. The production design by Arthur Max is unbelievable. You see exactly why Ridley Scott immediately ate him up and swallowed his entire career, which I don't know necessarily how you feel about that, but he did it, and there was a reason that he did it. And the practical makeup and prosthetic work done in the film by Rob Bottin, who had done like The Howling and The Thing, like it's like the entire tech team was firing on all cylinders, and as well as the cast. So,
well, can we talk about Kanji and about the color, the not just the color palette of the movie, but like the film teaches you how to watch it through its lighting. You know, there's the line, the script is really good at like interpolating, real scripture and, ancient poetry with kind of like bastardized versions of it, Cliff's Notes versions of it. I mean, we can get into the whole, the literary pedigree of the movie, but when
the gag of Brad Pitt ordering
hilarious
cop to bring him the Cliff's Notes version right after the incredible sequence of Morgan Freeman having the actual montage showing his passion for the library and even talking to the security guards. He's like, all of this just like art and history and all the stuff that you guys have access to at your fingertips, and here he is, and you have Bach playing while he's just beautifully going through all the books.
It's so elaborate. They're doing all these like fades and beautiful cutaways and everything like that. It's incredible, just in contrast.
But you have Freeman reading the quote. He says, "So long is the way and hard that from out of hell leads up into light," and it's amazing how the film follows that template, where the film gets brighter and brighter and lighter and lighter and hotter and hotter. The scene where Spacey turns himself in, I mean, I've always watched the movie trying to figure out exactly what time it's supposed to be, but it's, it's like first thing in the morning, and it's like the hardest dawn. It's like they're inside it's like they're inside a microwave oven or something. And then the final scene out on the highway is just in blinding sunlight. And these are the first moments in the film where there's been any visibility at all. Everything has been in rain. Everything has been at nighttime. So that idea of daylight horror is very Kubrick, but also the way the production design recedes. And the city recedes, and you get out in the middle of nowhere, and you have this line, like, it's ADR, but it's like ADR carved into a tablet, where the guy in the helicopter says, "There's sure as shit no ambush out here." And you find that the movie is so dialed in, you are so dialed into the movie. The lighting and the production design are telling the story. The lighting and production design are making you feel the way that you're feeling. It's a very pure, immersive, completely successful example of visual storytelling, not in the absence of compelling incident and character, but like amplifying them off the charts. Those choices are so interesting. They're so unexpected. They're twists without there having to be plot twists, right? The shifting of the palette, the shifting of the lighting, the shifting of visibility, that becomes a surprise. That becomes a shock, even beyond what's going on within the plot. And I would ask people to think about how often this is the case when they watch genre movies, to have those twists be so controlled and effective within the visual telling of the movie. It's a short list. It really is. It really is remarkable how carefully thought through this has been.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible to just take the setting that you've been used to, kind of, all these enclosed apartments that he's made, obviously very ugly and just kind of like decaying. But there's something about like the walls within them that you can hide behind. And I mean, even holding that, Sloth, for instance, holding him for a year without people knowing that he's just being drained and tortured for that long.
The perfect tenant.
It's just, yeah. And then to strip everything away in the finale and show the ultimate horror, the ultimate truth, or whatever it is, everything be exposed. It's like you almost miss the dreary rain pour and the shady apartments and everything else, because you're like, now there's just nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to go. You're just in this open field with these webbed wires, and we'll get to it, but it's in the box.
I also do love that it makes that transition very so subtly, to the point where I feel like over the course of the movie you could feel like you don't notice it, even though it is happening, and you do, I think, subconsciously notice it regardless, because it's baked into what it's doing. But there's a quality, I think, of just like a metronomic rhythm to the movie where I feel like you do get kind of sucked in, and you do go, oh yeah, it is brighter outside all of a sudden, or it is, I'm seeing something similar, but I don't know why it's similar. I mean, one of the ones that I have always loved is the way that montage of the calm and the peace of the library, and you get to see Somerset in like obviously his chosen field, what he would like, something he actually likes to do, to be in the library at midnight or whatever. And I think about how that editing contrasts what would become obviously an iconic staple of the Fincher movie, which is the experimentally edited and kind of mood setting opening credit sequence, which was set to obviously Closer, the remix by Nine Inch Nails, and where you just get really locked into another headspace of someone, but it's the John Doe character before you've been even introduced to him, and you get into just that procedure and routine, the glimpses of him writing in his diary and developing his photos and shaving his fingerprints off, and all these. It's a sequence that feels like someone is like scratching at their scab, but it's been made into like an industrial 90s like music video, and it's a sequence that shows a character in their setting and in their passion, and then you get the same thing with the library sequence, I think. And I think that that's where Fincher really does show a sense of just really, really, to a show-offy degree, but like a visual sophistication on things that he's saying without telling you these things.
Yeah, it kind of gave me a little bit of what Gore Verbinski does in The Ring a little bit when he's showing.
Speaking of another music video turned director.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Throw Alex Proyas in there too, and we'll hit the whammy. We've named them all.
Absolutely. Yeah, but it has that. It like you said, it's kind of like it's like nails on a chalkboard to the most disgusting degree, but visually speaking, and the editing is incredible. All those he almost like grains out the visuals. It's super grainy, and I do love too that he's basically
emulsions in it.
Yeah, and he's telling you the entire film right in front of you in the opening title credits, and then he's just like, "All right, now see it all unravel." It's brilliant. It really is.
Well, it can't be overstated how much that opening credit sequence reaches back to not so much Fincher's music videos, but let's just say back to or parallel to, a turn in music videos, that sort of dark turn. It is steeped in the alt rock of the era, not just because it's a Nine Inch Nails song. I mean, we mentioned Mark Pellington. This is around the time of Pellington's video for Jeremy, which is a really interesting predecessor to the style you have in the opening 7 credit sequence, these kind of synaptic flashes and cryptic text and, violence that's suggested rather than shown. I also always think of 7, I wrote about it in the book, parallel to the booklet for Pearl Jam's album Vitalogy, which is like a weird medical textbook. Fincher didn't work on that album or any of the videos for it, but that sort of grim turn, that self-melodramatizing turn in alt-rock, 7 so comes out of that. It is indivisible from Nine Inch Nails. It's indivisible from, I think, a period that I would call, and I'm not meaning it as a put-down, I'm trying to just characterize the kind of art it is. It's quite juvenile, right? It has a very juvenile, very adolescent sense of the world, but it makes that juvenile adolescence feel very grave, which is why I respect 7 very much by saying that it's pulp. It's pulp that is so well made and acted with such gravity, you catch yourself wondering if it's not profound at times. Mm-hmm. But I think that one of the reasons I like Fincher so much is that he got past this. Many people would not get past this because many filmmakers couldn't do this on their best day. Seven's not a movie you have to transcend in terms of quality, but one of the reasons I like Zodiac so much is very specifically because it sees Seven and it does something else. A very deliberate, definite, precise rejection of some of the things that Seven is that Seven is about. It goes beyond it. I say it with respect to Seven, which is like it's pretty hard to make a perfect movie in your late 20s and then somehow become a better filmmaker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I totally
absolutely
agree.
I love the bit too. I love the bit too. I just wanted to mention it because I tried to talk about it a bit in the book, and we were talking about how the movie teaches you how to watch it. It is so funny when they find "Help Me" written behind the mirror, and the way that takes on a different meaning in the context of a rewatch.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a cry for help. It's not like The Exorcist, which it alludes to. Save me being coming out of Linda Blair's stomach. The "Help Me" is all about complicity. The "Help Me" is all about, if I'm going to get this done, I really need you guys to help.
Keep going.
And
keep searching.
Keep going, keep searching. And, ultimately, if you could help pull the trigger, I love that. I love that bit. I love how double-edged that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a huge part of like where the structure really does come into it, because I think part of you is there's a sleight of hand to the fact that you have the buddy relationship, and you do get some qualities about Mills and his wife Tracy, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, obviously, and the way that he moved to the city so that he can play Serpico, and he's got a cocky sort of aggressive manner, and he's a little bit he's chatty, loves to shoot the shit, he doesn't like being treated like a kid by his superiors. I love that "don't jerk me off, man" like kind of way. Let's not start by kicking each other in the balls kind of stuff. Even the way that he even is in a rush to get to like the exciting cop movie shit, where he's like, that's like Law and Order line or CSI line he gets, where he's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a homicide here." There's something so just bullishly kind of confident that's hiding a little bit of a moral mission that he actually has to catch the bad guy, and something he believes is valuable and something that he can actually do. And with Somerset, obviously you have more traditional sort of noir protagonist in the sense that you have a loner whose dedication to his work makes him, disagreeable, as he puts it. But he's calm and methodical and very completely professional, despite the fact that, he's tired and despairing at the state of everything around him. And it's a very, very basic setup of just having, he's not only is there 7 kills every day, it's 7 days till retirement. Which is one of the things that I sometimes forget, that I'm like, oh, that's also baked into the structure of this. And it's actually one of the few subversions it does, is that it doesn't kill the guy before retirement and have him go out in a way where it teaches the rookie a lesson or whatever. He deliberately goes in a different direction with it. But the fact that, you have something that I think is so immediately pleasurable to someone just watching any kind of cop procedural movie, and then you decide that you're going to interrupt that with the thing he's perversely interested in, which is the staged artwork of a new shock and a new corpse every few minutes, and this sense of preaching through punishment and this forced attrition and doing all of these. Obviously you can go through all the various different ones. I do think that Sloth was the one that disturbed me the most when I was younger. I think partially because you do have the twist of him gasping for air. That moment was one of the first ones where I was like, am I allowed to be watching this? This is what adult movies are like? I felt the same way at the build up and implication, obviously, to the Polaroid of the custom made strap on with the knife. I feel like that was another image that I went, my brain is putting pieces together it shouldn't be putting together. This is why are you doing this to me?
You just have to mention it, and you're like, oh great, there it is in my head. Awesome.
Yeah, but I find the way that he moves through it, the way that he hits gluttony, and he indulges in every little texture of here's the Andy Warhol spaghetti cans, and here's the prosthetic corpse with the slimy skin and the roaches crawling in grease, the bucket of vomit, and just all that kind of stuff.
Even his lighting that he changes, like with Gluttony, when they come in, it's almost very dark, and you can almost just see the outline of the big man that's got his head in the spaghetti bowl. And then when they go to the model where her face has been mutilated, it's more like the lighting is actually more. It's much brighter, and they actually have some sunlight coming in, almost as if it would be a photo shoot. Like everything else in the apartment is also white. And just very clean looking, besides the blood that's obviously everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the staging and the architecture of these kills is so important to him. I think the one I actually found myself the most intrigued by this time around was the greed one. And it was specifically because of how he avoids showing it to you for a ridiculously long time, where you get Brad Pitt getting his case, watching the news report about it on the TV, and you're like, what is he talking about? And the way that is framed for the impact of that huge cut to that overhead shot where you see greed written on the floor in blood, and then it's like scenes and scenes later before you even hear about the specific details of handing him a butcher knife and making him cut a pound of flesh out of his body and all of that. And you can just, there's so much pleasure in his work is what I'm going to call it when Fincher comes to staging these sequences and inflicting these sequences on both his characters and on us, that I just find, both upsetting and contradictory and maybe immoral, but in a way that, again, I think does drive the force of the movie in this brute force kind of way.
Speaking of contradiction, but also of the experience of watching it, funny thing, I mean, I'm older than you guys by a bit. I'm 43. Seven in Ontario was rated 14A.
No way. No way.
I saw Seven theatrically, and I was always interested in why that was, and I tried to sort of think through it at the time. There is very little shown violence.
It's aftermath,
And the reason that I remembered Seven being rated 14A, and also just while we're strolling down memory lane, Harmony Korine and Larry Clark's Kids was also 14A. So I saw that in theaters too when I was a teenager. But Ron Howard's Ransom with Mel Gibson was a hard R because there's so much gun violence. And I feel like Seven was a movie where for the censors or for ratings boards, it's a tricky one because there's a lot of gore, but in a kind of very Hitchcockian psycho sense, a lot of it is more suggested than shown. Now,
I would have thought just in terms of pure unpleasant tone, they would have said, no, that's too intense for children.
No. I mean,
14-year-old Canadians can do it.
They can handle it.
And so later on, when in the New Line Cinema release, The Butterfly Effect, you see a bunch of kids going to see Seven in a theater. It's a flashback to 1995. They actually go see Seven. Like, that's how you know how cursed the universe in The Butterfly Effect is these kids go see Seven right before a childhood trauma, I believe, or one of them sets a cat on fire or a dog on fire. I love the Butterfly Effect. It's a great movie.
I'm a fan too.
I'm a huge fan of it. But I identified with that scene because I was like, I saw Seven with teenagers too. My point being, we're talking about how sadistic and grim and how much pleasure Fincher takes in it. That pleasure is leveraged against what I'm going to call a Herculean sense of restraint.
Yes.
It is on that razor tip language of the movie. It's on that razor's edge, but it really stays there. I mean, that shot, the Polaroid of the strap-on is half a second long. Yeah. The woman who cuts her face off, you see for about 1 second. When we talk about the metronomic pacing of the movie, you will notice the crime scenes get less and less time spent on them as the movie goes along. Mm-hmm. Now, that's good storytelling instinct because he knows it's going to be redundant. Like, once they figured out it's the 7 deadly sins, whatever. But it's because he is going to surprise you with something different. And I love how he manages to use gore expressively, like when Spacey turns himself in, his hands are all bloody. It's this perfect idea of caught red-handed, But it's restrained. And there is a good 25, 30-minute stretch of Seven, including the box at the end. You see nothing. And really the most violent thing that happens is the one gunshot. And you really only see one, that medium shot between Pitt and Spacey. And then even the rest is off screen. The gun is pointing down off screen being shot. Mm-hmm. It's pretty restrained.
Yeah.
And
they more focus on Pitt's kind of emotional reaction than the actual impact. Yeah.
Which I think is why it lives in such an evil way or such a disgusting way in people's mind, because it's flashes, it's implication, it's suggestion. It's often a very little bit going a very long way.
It is. And I think about the way that I forget who the actor is, the guy who screams, the guy who's wearing the strap on.
Oh, his so
screams
good.
Are what I remember from that sequence the most when I rewatch it. I actually forgot that the camera is actually framed up at the ceiling, so you almost, like in a Wellesian way, so you almost don't, you get just enough glimpses of, the sheet on top of him and everything like that. But I feel like it was that guy screams, and with the raid sequence, I do love the fact that it's structured with the sleight of hand of you're watching an exciting raid sequence. I think that's one of the first times he really deploys like the exciting crane moving through the city. And there's a great line where he's like, these guys like love doing this or whatever, as they're like breaking the tactical nature of it. And then having those guys also be like shocked by what it is that they see. And,
I think I love that they kind of have the SWAT team come in, because there is that idea that they would normally be coming in because they think that there's a violent act that's going to be done against them as well. Like they're going to have guns and there's going to be retaliation. So it would be less like horrific. It would just be more of an action movie sequence. And then when you have the SWAT team come in and see the sloth, which is just one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in a movie, and have them react to it, I think that that's just such an added great detail. I also think, because we were talking about how the crime scenes start to quicken a little bit just as they go, because it does become redundant in what they're telling you. I think the sloth, and correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the if not the last one that kind of has that length to it, because it's also the point in the movie where they do the turn where Freeman looks at this and goes, we're dealing with someone that is beyond what I thought we were dealing with, or anything that I've seen before. And it's kind
that
of
line
that, like,
that you're
new
talking about.
I think
the one where he is so impressed by, it's the worst of all patient.
Yes.
That's like this, like the fact that he's just so impressed by the craftsmanship in a really kind of like perverse way, that it's just like, this is something, we cannot believe that we are even witnessing.
And having Brad react as like, he's still trying to keep that idea that no, this is just the monster of the week. It's another insane, fucked up human being. That's it. That's all we need to think about.
Just because he has a library card doesn't make him Yoda.
Yeah. Just, I love his delivery too. His kind of stuttering as he does it is so fucking unbelievably good. But just like it's jumping it up a notch. And it's someone like Freeman, who also is dressed very, like we were talking about how this kind of has more of it's like 40s mixed with the new wave 90s, and you have Freeman dressed in like the long trench coat and the fedora, and just him seeing this, you're like, what is this? This is new.
Who had that, he had that string of movies with like Driving Miss Daisy and Unforgiven and Shawshank Redemption, where it was like he commanded this aura of the older, respected man you listen to the wisdoms of.
Yeah.
And they really, really use that quality in his performance, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think Freeman is perfectly cast, and I think Pitt, I think it's his best performance for me.
Wow.
Nice.
I think it's the Pitt performance that I respond to the most, because a lot of that charm and a lot of those good looks, they are kind of stepped on a little bit. I mean, Mills really is kind of a punching bag, and you can feel Pitt just increasingly manic as it goes along. I love the chase sequence and the punchline to the chase sequence where he just kind of kicks the door in, like that's such a terrific bit. But the dualism in the script is wonderful too, because he has his version of the bribe and the kind of unethical cop stuff too. Freeman's is all about using the intelligence community to get information, and Pitt's all about bribing the drug addict next door to sort of say that's why he called the cops. Those comic beats are very funny. We should give it up and say, too, in the interest of, you don't want to be too hyperbolic, it's one of the best foot chases I've ever seen in an American film.
Oh, it's
I
great.
love that entire sequence.
And-
I think one, because the setup for it of, getting that illegal information compiled from the FBI for the library to just track down, guys who are reading flagged books in order to get their way there and everything. But when they arrive at his door and you just he frames it so perfectly to be so nonchalant when Kevin Spacey's faceless figure appears in the background and they go, oh, hey, like this might be our guy, and how nonchalantly he physically just pulls that gun out and starts it. And Fincher does this trick a lot. I think this was maybe the first time that he did it, but when he switches from that controlled and methodical, the camera is perfectly positioned, it's moving exactly how it's designed to that perfectly controlled chaos of the shaky intensity when he switches to handheld. Like, I think about that closing shot of like Mindhunter, for example. He waits for these moments where they are perfectly getting you into the headspace of suddenly there is something out of your control for these characters. And this is the closest he gets, I think, to alleviating a sense of control, even though when you hear about it, like how he orchestrated that fight recently in The Killer, where he was like, I'm going to manually recreate all of those shaky camera moves, like in post and everything. Like he still can't give it up entirely. But the way that he finds a way to just keep Spacey faceless through all the framing and all the lighting choices, moves through these labyrinth apartment complex, the hallways, the stairs, breaking through the windows, and while also keeping a clumsy physicality of Brad Pitt slipping on dumpsters and fire escapes, and that low angle shot that obviously it climaxes on of his shadowy figure in a puddle, and the Dutch angle like shallow focus shot of that gun next to his temple is unbelievable. That whole sequence.
There's one shot into a cut into a shot. It's exhilarating every time I watch it, and it's when Pitt stumbles down the roof and kind of slides and comes to a slide right in front of the door with his gun looking through the glass, and it cuts to Doe flipping up over the railing and down with his coat kind of billowing behind him. And you sort of go, that's like a better Batman movie in 2 seconds than anyone made on either end of Batman. The editing is so not just all the things that we say about editing. Like it's not just precise. It's creating not just continuity and narrative and momentum. It's like creating meaning. You know, that incredible moment of Pitt finally getting a look. It's his first look at the guy during the entire chase, and it's a look of him up and gone. You know, everything is just so elusive. Everything is just so kind of out of grasp and out of comprehension, but you're too in the middle of it to think about it. You have to keep moving, and not to be too, obvious about this, or to keep stroking the same, big male filmmaker egos or reputations, but who love to go from the controlled master shots into these bouts of static handheld craziness is Kubrick. Who always,
Barry Lyndon, we just talked about it not that long ago.
Barry Lyndon, but also in Paths of Glory and in The Killing, and it's a trick that Fincher learned, and he deploys it pretty studiously.
Yeah, one of my favorite details in this chase is when they both have these two character moments that I love, where it's them kind of dealing with the civilians that are opening their doors and just like getting involved because they're hearing gunshots and people running around the hallways and everything like that. And when it goes to Freeman, he's just like, "Ma'am, go back into your room and lock the doors." And then when it goes to Pitt, he's just like, "Get the fuck back in your room!" And he's like freaking out and kind of having a more emotional reaction to the whole thing. They're doing the same thing, but I just love the differences that they cut back and forth to him doing that.
The differences in temperament building buddy comedy is maybe one of the most surprising things about the movie. You'd be it's like, how does that tonally fit into what it is that he's doing here? But it absolutely does the entire time. Like, I agree with Adam. That moment when he, when you just have Freeman explaining very carefully the legal reasons they can't open that door, and you just get Pitt kicking it down, and that dolly through the darkness on the red door while he goes, "Well, no point arguing anymore. We're gonna go through this just nightmarish feat of production design of all the bulbs and the Polaroids and the chicken scratch journal entries that read like this man just vomiting out all of his sickest thoughts. And it's great.
I love too the further taunting of when they find the photographs and then they find the one of them on the staircase and they're like, motherfucker, this was the guy. He just passed us and like taunted us.
And this is one of the few moments where sometimes I do get into the satisfaction of those writerly elements where like setting up the fact that obviously he ends up buying information later and how easy it is for, people to bribe police officers or for paparazzi to get there closer. Like there's little nuggets of detail like that are not just a great sort of shock moment for the audience, but again, are playing a sense of sleight of hand with where the movie is going, even though you have a character literally in this movie say this isn't going to have a happy ending, which is one of those like bold moments of you just like stating exactly like what you should know, and the movie moves in an opposite way while it's doing it to kind of trick you into getting into the excitement of we are going to uncover this thing. We are going to these detectives are going to do something. Like look at all those dogs he has. He's such a nice guy. Like
again, that's why it's like that second time I just really feel that doom sense of it all. But like we've been saying, you also can't look away. There is this he has this momentum through the editing and through his unbelievable camera movements. Like one that I wanted to mention that's at the end of the chase sequence that kind of further develops the idea of like the mystery behind who John Doe is or whatever, is when they get really close encountered and he knocks over Brad Pitt in the rain next to the truck in the alleyway. And he puts the gun right to his head just to taunt him and just to kind of toy with him. And they do this amazing camera move where the focus is right on the barrel of the gun next to the skin of his forehead, and his face is both blurred by the camera but also darkened by the fedora that he's wearing. And it's just, I fucking love it so much. It's incredible. And also, you got the rain coming down and dripping and everything just to add a little bit of texture. It's incredible.
Well, and his decision obviously not to kill him and to be there's more
in store for you. Yeah.
there's more fun to be had for Detective Mills here and more to be done.
Yeah. Can I proffer an interesting little bit of trivia? Do you know who one of the first potential casting choices for John Doe was?
I feel like I read this. Was it Ned Beatty?
I don't know if it was Ned Beatty, but it would tie it to the music video aspect, and it would make a very different. I mean, it would have been a very different movie. There was originally a desire to cast Michael Stipe from the American rock band REM in his bald period, because that would have given it this idea of a kind of guru or a wisdom or a sort of a, the way that someone like David Bowie was sometimes used. I mean, Stipe had an awful lot of gravity at that point. He was the guy who did Everybody Hurts, It would have been a very perverse piece of casting. Yeah. I think about Ed Kowalczyk from Live as the waiter in Fight Club, or Meatloaf in Fight Club. I mean, Fincher has used rock stars in other of his movies, but as annoying as it is to talk about Spacey, he's an emblematic Fincher actor between Seven and House of Cards, and it's quite.
I don't know if this works without the satanic energy that Kevin Spacey has
so
in that role.
This, I have to say,
it's quite the pocket tour de force,
Yeah,
and it really is.
And also just the decision to keep him so on the periphery of the film, and obviously the incredible decision to not bill him in the credits until the end, and to really save him for his entrance, and to just make him so unpleasantly center frame and so verbose.
And I'm so glad that he's more smug and honestly grounded in his delivery. Like, he's not doing that typical manic thing that you'd think this is the crazy guy that came up with the genius scheme to do 7 deadly sins. He does, as he's talking to them, there's just a lot of he's almost got apathy in his voice. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of inflection or anything like that. There
was a deliberate decision to make him incredibly intelligent,
and to
be able to have a conversation more in Morgan Freeman's register than in Brad Pitt's.
Yeah, and the only time he really does do anything that's outlandish, and I think it's a brilliant move in the moment, is when he does reveal himself, like he turns himself in when he's all bloodied, and to get their attention, yes, he just screams it, and it's the only time he does it, and it's just for them to turn around and be like, this is the next step. I just needed your attention so that we could get to the next step of my plan. And it's I think all of those choices are brilliant, and also just that reaction, briefly going back to the Brad Pitt performance and his emotional reaction when he finds, like, he hands himself in, and Pitt does this thing where he takes out his gun and he's just like, get down on the fucking ground, put your nose on the fucking, like, goes nuts as if he has found him in that moment and he did it. Like he's got this, he's almost trying to exude like a strength about him, like he cracked the case, but really it's just him showing up and being like, hey, detectives, arrest me. And I love that emotional outburst. I think it's great.
It is in my memory, it's 30 years ago now, which is sad because I'm old. It is one of those times where the collective intake of breath in the movie theater was palpable. I mean, it's a different culture. It was a pre-internet culture, a non-spoiler culture. I wasn't at a press screening because I was 13 years old, but I saw it, pretty early on. And just bonkers quiet and shock within the theater.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, well, and obviously it leads to this, climactic sort of final third of the movie, which has a fantastic setup, obviously, of quickly making its way through the sort of lust and the pride victims before he turns himself in, giving you this setup of Mills and Somerset. He will show them the two remaining bodies of Envy and Wrath, and he will sign a guilty confession if they drive him out there alone and they play part of this, which is all these things where you're kind of going, you guys should, figure, know that there's something up here and this isn't going to go exactly the way that you think it is. Although I will say, again, one of the few sort of screenwriterly bits I do like is how many times Brad Pitt brings up Tracy in those sequences, the Gwyneth Paltrow character. He's like, my wife doesn't even have cable, I think he says at one point to him in the interrogation room. And then also he mentions in a sort of intimate moment with the Freeman character, if I keep coming home late, my wife's going to think something's up, because they become so obsessed with the case. We've actually kind of forgotten that she hasn't been on screen for a little while. Again, it's part of the sleight of hand that the movie is playing with, and they obviously decide they're going to go finish this. They escort him in the back seat of the cruiser wearing the wires to record that conversation. And I love the setup of Freeman being like, if John Doe's head splits open and a UFO should fly out, I want you to have expected such a thing. And they drive out to obviously the remote sort of like outskirts of the city, as we've been talking about, where you get all the power lines and you get the just the incredible bright but vast and obviously still kind of imposing desert scenario. Briefly on the way, obviously making their way into, really giving Kevin Spacey the time to delve into the, his beliefs and his project and how smiling and sort of giddy he is about the, the celebrity factor of it. You get Pitt talking about the fact that that's where you get the sort of sledgehammer line about how he wants to be written about. You obviously get into the sanity aspect. Brad Pitt makes tons of moments about, when you're masturbating in your own feces, do you stop and go, I'm fucking crazy or whatever? You get into the Sodom and Gomorrah sort of religious aspect and the work and the taking pleasure in the work aspect. You get into his convictions, obviously, that he's not killing innocent people, he's killing sinners, which is maybe the thing that is remembered frequently the most about the movie when you're an edgy teenager watching the movie and you're like, kind of like, he's like,
actually right.
he's doing his own version of wiping the scum off the streets, kind of element to it. Yeah. And obviously building to just an incredibly pieced together sequence of them in the middle of nowhere, just dust and the vistas and the delivery driver in the van pulling up and obviously the package being delivered with a box that they think, could it be a bomb or could it potentially be Tracy, Gwyneth Paltrow's head in the box, which has become, as Jamie mentioned, just an incredibly iconic finale that almost never happened, and obviously is such a fantastically bleak and I guess you could say unsatisfying ending to a movie that has been so deliberately playing with your satisfaction. And it was rejected by producers when they were doing it. They tried to have Walker rewrite tons of, and I think what's the popular thing that Fincher says about it, that he swears that he was sent the first draft of the script.
He said he wanted to make the movie because of the head in the box. But you said something not to push against it, but to talk about how complex an idea it is, which is it is an unsatisfying ending. It's also a completely satisfying ending.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the project completing to its complete masterpiece vision, I think, is satisfying. But I think it's unsatisfying in a traditional sense that the heroes don't. I guess, as you could say, I guess you said they don't want to stop it, but the movie doesn't want them to stop it. But I do think on some level those characters are absolutely broken by the fact that they couldn't stop it. Right?
They're broken, and their fates become perfectly swapped, which is that Pitt, who's hoping, Mills, who's hoping to start this career in law enforcement, is finished. And Somerset, who had wanted to retire, his last line before the final voiceover is, I'll be around.
Yeah.
They're completely, thwarted and inverted to one another. And and it also lines up that ending when we talk about satisfaction. It's a grim kind of satisfaction, but it doesn't just pay off in the fairy tale sense of the head in the box and Pitt losing his wife. It all has to do with that idea of the future, where she is telling Somerset that she's pregnant. And he talks about how his nihilism, but also he thought the humane thing to do is to not raise a child in a world like this. And so he sort of gives her that advice.
Those are the scenes I sometimes forget about, but on rewatches, they stand out hugely. Like the way that Freeman tries to so carefully say that, like, I made this decision, but I also regretted, it's a complex thing. I regretted this decision in a way. And Paltrow's performance in that sequence is really, really good.
Well, because her death comes to be not just the death of his lover, but the death of the unborn child, which is where the film starts edging into this weird ideological territory. And if you read a lot of the dissertations or the academic writing about Seven, in addition to a movie about crime or about the relationship of scripture to pop culture, like there's a lot of academic writing on Seven. I waded through a lot of it in order to write the book. People talk about it as a weird kind of abortion narrative, as a movie that touches on that idea, because in committing that murder, he's not just killing one person, he's killing two, and symbolically he's killing any idea of the future, which is where that question of satisfaction kind of becomes so perverse in order for the movie's design to lock into place. Not just these really thorny questions of deserve and validity, but it's like he's not just killing people, he is like killing the future, He is killing any idea of a way out of this. And they really...
And smirking while he does it. I think about that delivery of he didn't know. As Brad Pitt is just like completely stunned into that like really intense close-up, down the barrel of his gun.
Yeah.
Which is maybe the one part in the movie that I feel like people do cite as one of the moments they have a little bit of a problem with Brad Pitt's performance, but I've never really understood that. I think that moment is so oh gods, and the way that the camera follows him as he goes up and down in the frame and stuff.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments of his performance is there's this close-up where he's holding the gun at his head, but it looks almost as if he's holding the gun at the camera. And he has a line where, I can't remember the line exactly, but he's just breaking down and he's in tears. And he does this thing where he's crying and crying and crying. And then for a split second, it might even be like a half second, he tries to compose himself and he goes back to like, I'm actually the hero that I've been trying to portray this whole time. And it's so quick. It literally is less than a second. And then he goes right back to being broken down.
And the way that he keeps trying to like point the gun in a way that like Dirty Harry would point it at the camera, but also and like that rage hits in too, where he's flipping between those two. He has a lot of things going on in that performance.
Yeah, and I think also the whole like unhinged quality of it does make it feel sometimes maybe so raw that it's uncomfortable. But I think that's fine. It matches the information that we've just been delivered to us. You know what I mean? Like this is an unbelievably disgusting and horrendous thing that's just occurred, and it's very personal to him, obviously. So
well,
I think
he gets so emotional, it feels a bit embarrassing to witness, and it does to me feel like when you're seeing like a kid who's been maybe acting like a grown-up and then gets devastated and confused when something just like reality just kind of sinks into that moment for him, I think.
And there's literally nothing he can do about it, so he is just having a tantrum.
The movie's been over for like 30 minutes and he didn't know it.
Yeah, and it is a tantrum. And then there's also these like 30 minutes prior that he has these lines where he's just like, I hope my wife doesn't get upset with me because I've been home, like I've been getting home late every night, implying that he hasn't been seeing her or talking to her very often, and that's there's a reason why. So there's all these things too, but I think the tantrum aspect of his performance is actually very warranted, especially when people don't seem to talk about the rest of the movie and his performance. It's like he has these little things throughout the film. We've been talking about them this entire conversation, and then this is just the time where all of that bubbles up. It's been bubbling, and now it's bursting, and now it's an embarrassing
you can see it break in front of you,
and it's embarrassing just because of how unhinged it is. I mean, you understand why he would be so fucking distraught, but it's just so, it's a raw nerve. That's what you're watching. And I do also love, there's like some irony with Freeman almost deciding to stay because he's seen such evil now, and it's
well, I think
like
he gets my read of it anyway is that he kind of gets bought into the Mills project a little bit by witnessing this thing that he's done. The scene that always stands out to me when I rewatch is that exchange that they have in the bar, where you do get, Freeman trying to explain to him that if we catch him and he turns out to be the devil, that might live up to our expectations, but it's not going to go down like that. You have Pitt, I think, really, effectively pushing back against this sense of this apathy that he has. And, you have Freeman discussing apathy as a solution. He's like, I, relate to that and all of that. But the thing that stands out to me, and I think maybe one of my favorite moments in Brad Pitt's entire career, is when he gets that moment where he's pushing back and he's, very much writerly laying out the fact that, I don't think you're quitting because you believe these things about the world. I think you want to believe them because you're quitting. But it's not that moment. It's the part where he goes, you want me to say that you're right. It's all fucked up. We should all just fucking give up and abandon all of this. And there's a specific hesitation and a change in delivery between him saying, but I won't say that. I won't tell you that.
Yeah.
I don't agree with you. I do not. And then the last one, which is I can't, which is he's saying three different things, and he's realizing what it is that he's saying, which is that I can't do my job and believe the things that you believe. And I do think that aspect of it makes its way into Freeman's thing, where he kind of goes, I am going to continue to, the world needs people who believe the things that this guy believes in, kind of deal, or at least someone fighting for them in some capacity. Or also maybe they just threw the epilogue in because they were like, the people will like it.
Maybe
they'll like it. They'll feel a little bit better than if they just shot him in the head and it cut to black.
Yeah,
he wanted it to go straight to black. Wanted it straight to black.
That's fair, and I think that would be amazing, and I still I would honestly love that, but I still do think that this kind of works, because I feel like when he's saying that it's like we'd have to meet the devil to go to our expectations. I feel like the fame or infamy, whatever you want to call it, this ending of this movie has kind of proved in that point that at the end, at least in cinematic terms, you kind of have met the devil. And so the only response to that is to just be like, well, I have to fight against that if this is what the world is, because it's like it's the only reality we have, kind of thing. So I get, I think the cut to black would be perfectly great. Honestly, it would work so well, and it would be horrifying and everything like that.
It would match the editing patterns of the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I still do love, though, the thought that he's like, the world is, he's quoting Ernest Hemingway saying the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. But I agree with the second part. I do like that there's still that cynicism where he's like, the world is fucking hell. I just watched it. I met the devil, but it is still worth fighting against. That's almost what he feels like he's saying too. Not even that the world is worth fighting for. It's almost worth fighting against something that fucking horrifying. But yeah, the cut to black would be sweet. I agree. But I like it either way. I really do like the quote and the way Freeman delivers it. And I do think it kind of connects well with what Freeman is doing with John Doe, while Brad Pitt is trying to like kind of egg him on in the car when they're leading into the desert, where Freeman he only has a couple questions that he says to him, but every time he does, you can actually see John Doe, like in Spacey's performance, the wheels are actually turning a little bit, and he actually has to think about what he's responding to so that his whole plan still kind of makes sense within his philosophy. And I think that those moments are kind of telling of Freeman still having a little bit of hope and tact and everything, even though he's like, I wish I could get out of here. I could retire, you know.
I want to shout out to my favorite Freeman line reading in the movie. It is such a great little piece of acting, and again, it speaks to restraint, which is we never see inside the box. You know, the head in the box is never shown. We only get that one, point of view synaptic flash of Tracy's face, which may or may not be a reference to Woody Allen's Manhattan, with Woody Allen saying Tracy's face. I was going to mention that too. That
flash cut of her face right before he pulls the trigger is insane.
Yeah. It's insane. But what I was going to say about Freeman is he has a line that when he opens the box, he says it into the walkie-talkie, and the delivery of John Doe has the upper hand.
Oh, yeah.
And it's staged in a way where you are well aware that Spacey is on his knees at the wrong end of a gun. I mean, obviously, the switching up of the choreography from the end of the chase scene with the gun to the head and on the knees is very deliberate. The movie is filled with little reversals like that. But Freeman's delivery of that line, and then the confusion as you cut away from it and him starting to run, it's, again, when you're in the hands of a filmmaker who is actually going to deliver. And that's where the queasiness is the queasiness of excitement. That head in the box is what the movie has to literally and figuratively deliver. All their rhetoric about when we meet this guy, is it going to be worth it, or who is he, or what's he capable of? You look through the long history, or even maybe the long history of serial killer films or of these procedurals, but all the 90s films that were riffing on Silence of the Lambs, they don't deliver. And this movie, with the FedEx truck literalizing it delivers.
Yeah, with a smirk on its face, with smugness.
It delivers with that smirk on its face, and I think that is, in some ways, it seems very simple. It's what we expect procedural films and genre films to do. The fact that so few do it in any kind of memorable way, or in any kind of truly potent way. Hope springs eternal. Whenever I watch one of these things, you're sort of chasing the feeling you get the first time you're watching Seven. And I say this as someone who thinks ultimately Seven's kind of junk, like brilliantly made junk, like masterpiece junk, and that Fincher transcends it with a movie like Zodiac, where the whole point of the movie is there is no devil to meet. If you make Seven, but you don't meet the devil at the end, you're making a completely, I think, more mature kind of movie.
Yeah,
but
you're making Zodiac.
Yeah.
You're making Zodiac. But God,
where it's
the
a stare
pleasure
down in a convenience store and a hardware store.
Yeah. But the pleasure of that encounter with a very comic book kind of evil in Seven is, as a teenager seeing it when I was 14 or 15, it felt like the greatest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I'm
right there with you.
I say it all the time on the show. I've told the story, but like I grew up Catholic, so the whole God, devil, evil, good thing is ingrained in me, even if I don't necessarily practice or believe it. It's just kind of always been fascinating. So when a movie, and they do, so many movies kind of deliver in that line, that promise, almost like we're going to deliver the devil to you at one point. And I just feel like this is one of the films that kind of it delivers what it promises, and it again, there is like a juvenile quality to it, but I'm just obsessed with how stylized it all is, and still, I do like that it's still tackling with some philosophies with depth and connecting them to like the way that Freeman intakes the information, and like the Dante's Inferno and everything compared to Pitt, and how they're using kind of their emotional imbalances, whether it be Freeman's more sturdiness and Pitt's more kind of unhinged quality. I do think that there's a lot of still, maturity in this. It's just, I think kind of what the material itself is like inherently kind of juvenile, at least the way that it's set up. But Fincher just elevates it a lot. Not to say that it's bad writing. I think the writing is really good and still fascinating. It's definitely,
Fincher has made a career out of doing it. Girl with Dragon Tattoo, Gone Girl, these are not things that I would necessarily say raise to the status of high art in terms of how they were written, even though I do enjoy them and the material. But he is someone who has always been able to engineer them into something that feels like it has a really, really powerful artistic purpose, even if that artistic purpose is to sadistically show you art installation murder and be like, isn't this guy kind of really good at what he does? And aren't I really good at what I do?
Yeah.
But I think if we're pivoting towards the reductive rating round, I do think that like the relentlessly pounding and overwhelming nature of the particular sense, I think, of the obsessiveness and the stylistic control and the grim trickster plotting of it all and the sledgehammer attention drawing approach that it's taken. It's one of those things that I think for a lot of people, it either works for you, it doesn't. It's either aged, gracefully, or it still just plays as, you're an angsty teen and this was the first time you watched a movie that was disgusting and disturbing, made by a music video director. And I think that weirdly, I watch it now and I kind of go, I think both of those things are true. I think that I am absolutely enthralled with Fincher's just like dread-inducingly hell on earth sort of formal vision he's doing here, and the way that he uses these sort of like gritty noir and horror aesthetics and the dinginess and the rottenness and the texture and the ambience, and really does use them to just elevate the pulpy shocks and the sort of philosophical and misanthropic pretension of Walker's, sort of sin against the sinner script that he's doing here. And I think it is just kind of impossible to deny the unpleasant, just brute force power that this movie has, and also the allure of it. Like, I forgot to mention Brad Pitt's line about you're a fucking t-shirt. You're a fucking movie of the week. And I feel like that is how I look at the material sometimes. You're a fucking t-shirt. This is like, but then I just see that what Fincher sees in that. And I do know that he felt similarly about like the fact that he's making a cop procedural about a veteran who's retiring and a hot-headed rookie, and they're having buddy antics. And, he felt similarly about some of the things that he was doing, but then he just got so attracted and gravitated towards the sense of just pure evil that was on display, and not just on display, but like on biblical display, on like how these characters are again just like defeated, helpless janitors following this, these art pieces from moment to moment, and the purpose with which it does that, the glee with which it does that, the hypnotic predetermined nature of how it builds to all those sadistic and sort of self-aggrandizing moments, I think is really, really spectacularly done. And we've already said all the, shouted out all the technicians who were involved who did incredible work on here. But I will say, I think ultimately, I do think, despite how horrifying and miserable this movie is, some of the things that I do really latch onto is, the performances and the characters here. I do think that Freeman and Pitt and Spacey and Paltrow, Arlie Ermey, who briefly shows up talking about Kubrick, has fantastic little moments that he has, and these moments of introspection and these moments of talking about literature and the opposition in tone to some of the more sadistic and unpleasant things that the movie shows you, really does, I think, build out a larger portrait of, here are Somerset and here is John Doe as two very intellectual, jaded nihilists who are both kind of responding to the same things but in different ways. One obviously a lot more extreme than the other one, but I think it's kind of really important that here's a movie that weirdly, perversely kind of identifies and gets a thrill out of identifying sometimes with its killer. And that is something that is, upsetting to think about, and maybe it's juvenile, but it's something that really does power this movie. And it's something that I think really does kind of separate it from, what you might see in other serial killer films, even though I guess you could argue, Silence of the Lambs has an attraction to Hannibal Lecter. That's for sure. But I think both of these movies are the best examples of someone doing that. So yeah, this is a 5 for me. I love this one.
Yeah. I'm upgrading it for this time around, and I'm 5ing it too. This film, honestly, I've just loved it more every time I've seen it. I think I probably watched it back in the college years, my first time, and then recently watched it like I don't know, I think it was like 5 years ago until this time. So it's been like a once every 5 years kind of thing. But I feel like I'm gonna be watching it more because of, again, the pacing is unbelievable. I think the editing is so precise, and I love all of the just adding all of this style to some of the most horrific and disgusting crime scenes I've ever seen is really something else to watch. I think the chase sequence is particularly amazing. I agree with you, Adam. I think it's one of the best. I just love like how it's going from those enclosed spaces out into the open, rainy streets, and then you get the stylized kind of alleyway fight and everything. It's just there's a lot of layers to it that I think are fantastic. Yeah, I mean, not much to add that we've already said, but I do love Howard Shore's. His score is pretty good throughout, but something that I love that he does in the finale is he has this like simplistic score to it, where he has these brass instruments kind of just making like one or two notes, just almost like a Jaws rhythm in a way, and it just creeps up and gets louder and louder and louder until the big reveal happens, and Pitt shoots Spacey and everything. And there's a simplicity to it, but I think that's kind of where the genius lies in it. It just makes you so tense, and I like that it's orchestral instruments as well. It's not like a synth or anything like that. It gives a little bit more of a punch and a oomph to it that I think is brilliant. I also love the little details that like Freeman has with being involved in the police work for so long. Like he mentions like almost an FBI conspiracy. Like it's like if you buy certain books, you're on a certain blacklist.
Oh, it's not a conspiracy,
right? Yeah. I do believe that's a thing. But it's I just love that he incorporates that into the actual procedural element of it all. Then there's some like really morbid stuff like the street rules that he's learned over the years, where he teaches girls to say fire instead of help when they're being assaulted, because no one's going to come save them if they're saying help. Like just kind of getting into the unfortunate human psychology of it all. And I think it's great. And also I was reading too with critics, they were saying at the time like the Usual Suspects and stuff like that with their twists were more preferred. And I just like I've recently watched The Usual Suspects and things that are kind of known for their big twist endings, also with Kevin Spacey, ironically enough. But honestly, I didn't feel like it worked as well the second or third time. Whereas Seven, I keep picking up these details that lead into the doom, and it makes me feel like this weird anticipation and wanting it to stop, but I can't help but keep watching. And I just I don't necessarily get that from a lot of movies that are almost supposedly hinging on the big twist ending. This one ends up not actually having that, but that's what a lot of people really just talk about with this movie. And if that is all you're kind of looking for, I think it honestly works better the second, third, fourth time. So 5, fantastic.
Yeah. For you, Adam?
I will say 5. I will say that I remember being a kid and reading the Globe and Mail. Rick Groen was the Globe critic in the mid-90s, and this was before really accessing criticism on the internet. I don't think there was a particularly virtuosic moment for Toronto film criticism, I remember Rick Groen gave this film 4 stars, and the Globe was kind of stuffy, and Rick Groen was kind of stuffy. And I remember reading his review when I was 13 or 14, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was something he was like, this is an unpleasant movie and it's a commercial film and people are going to say that this is too high a rating. But he's like, this is what a piece of art looks like. And I remember thinking that carried a lot of weight at my kitchen table. My dad was all like, oh my God, did you see this movie got 4 stars in the Globe and Mail? So that was a sort of imprinting moment. My local film critic, the Toronto film critic, who we read at the kitchen table on Friday, had said this thing was very good. So yeah, it's a 5-star movie. But again, I'm not saying it to denigrate it. It's more to Fincher's credit that I think he steadily moved beyond this. I think it's a movie that the people who imitate him or who use the David Fincher lookbook, could never, Yeah, as a directorial flex, it's amazing. But I like that as his career went on, this kind of sealed off, hermetic, again, kind of adolescent perfection is something that he was able to surpass. But it deserves every bit of praise for being achieved in the first place, because for what it is, it's perfect.
Yeah. Somehow it's a restrained, sadistic, gross out movie, which I do think is insane that exists.
That delivers what it promises in all its wrath.
That's right. But I think that's going to wrap it up for 7 here. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be moving it along to the movie Adam really wanted to talk about here. His favorite movie, the next book, I assume, Mothman Prophecies.
Earthquakes are going to happen. People you know and love are going to die. And no matter what that voice tells you,
You're frightened right now, aren't you?
there's nothing you can do about it.
I can stop this.
All right, we are back, and we are talking The Mothman Prophecies, the 2002 American supernatural horror mystery procedural directed by Mark Pellington, written by Richard Hatem, who was adapting John Keel's 1975 book, and starring Richard Gere as a widowed reporter who travels to West Virginia to write up about the local legend of the Mothman and various strange psychic experiences and visions that might be connected to his wife's death that begin to obsess him. This is our first time talking about music video director turned filmmaker Mark Pellington, who I did not realize until today, the son of Baltimore Colts NFL linebacker Bill Pellington.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Like Fincher, directed a bunch of music videos, in this case for U2, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. The Leonard Cohen one in there too, a Bruce Springsteen cool. One's in there. And coincidentally enough, one Nine Inch Nails one right before landing this project, which is I believe his third feature. And Adam, you might need to clarify here. Following his debut and sophomore efforts, which neither of us have seen, but it's Going All the Way, which looks like some like a lesser known Ben Affleck drama that came out like between Chasing Amy and Good Will Hunting, and then Arlington Road, which from what I could gather was like a domestic terrorism thriller with Jeff Bridges and Tim Robbins.
How was Arlington Road not just standard issue teenage viewing for you guys? It's because you're young.
That's what it is. We were, when did Arlington Road come out? We were probably like 6.
Arlington Road is by master screenwriter Aaron Kruger, nominated for the Academy Award for Top Gun Maverick, and he also did the American adaptation of The Ring, which was mentioned earlier, and he's written a Transformers movie. And I would say that Arlington Road is a very script-driven movie because it is it's a twist film. And the fact that you guys haven't seen it means I don't want to spoil it, but it's about and it's one of those movies where you're like, this guy can't be a very good professor because he's an expert in a subject and then doesn't realize that like that subject is happening to him. But Jeff Bridges plays a guy who teaches a course on domestic terrorism, and then he thinks his next door neighbors are a little weird, and like, are his next door neighbors also domestic terrorists? But it is very, it's a very 70s coded and 70s styled movie where you sort of have Jeff Bridges investigating these neighbors without realizing for the entire film how much he's playing into their hands. And it's a movie that references, Timothy McVeigh and David Koresh and sort of the psychology of American domestic terrorism, not divorced from politics exactly, but like really sort of, turned into like Rosemary's Baby. Where it sort of like the suburbs contain all kinds of weird cults and cabals, and are your neighbors planning to bomb a post office tomorrow? But it has a really terrifying and arresting.
You're making it sound like The Burbs.
Well, The Burbs plus The Parallax View versus, plus American Beauty. But it has this really arresting opening sequence of a kid walking through the suburbs, and like the sound design is all wonky and the kids' hands are bleeding and you wonder what's happened to him. And it's so indebted to the Jeremy video he did for Pearl Jam, which is all these kids in their school uniforms like splattered with blood. Like, I don't want to hijack this by talking about the Jeremy video, which I think won the MTV Video Award, but you know, that's a song about a kid who kills himself in class. And the video takes that idea and just makes it into this kind of like cryptic visual cluster of Bible verses, and you see the temperature from the day, and the kids are giving a Sig Heil salute in their classroom, and it's so confusing that at the end a lot of people thought that Jeremy had shot his classmates, but it's more that they're all spattered with his blood. The fact that you're not nodding along, I can see, means you did not grow up on the Jeremy music video.
I did not grow up on the Jeremy music video.
Being like the most harrowing thing that existed on Much Music, you know, outside of primetime. I mean, the video was given all kinds of warnings because it dealt with teen suicide. Mm-hmm. And I think that was Mark Pellington's entree into feature filmmaking. You know, just that film had that music video had so much potency and graphic power and violence in it that it was only a matter of time before he was going to start making movies. And Arlington Road is pretty good, but it's not the movie we're here to talk about.
No, we're here to talk about the Mothman Prophecies, which I have not read the book for this either, but based on its description, it's funny. It reminded me of reading about another author we talked about recently with Esther Rosenfield on the show, who was maybe more explicit in his writings about it, but Whitley Strieber. We talked about Communion not that long ago with Esther, which was obviously the purported, nonfiction book about his alien encounter. And in here you have journalist John Keel, who, in the 1960s claims to have done this personal investigation into various, UFO witnesses and theories that resulted in him traveling to West Virginia, where he heard reports of this large winged creature with psychic supernatural powers who may or may not have collapsed the Silver Bridge on the Ohio River, leading to obviously a bunch of casualties. And Pellington, I'm not totally sure how he ended up getting involved here, because I guess it was adapted on spec by the Under Siege 2 writer Richard Hatem, who I had no idea why. And originally, I guess for One False Move and Devil in a Blue Dress director Carl Franklin, who eventually collabed with Fincher on Mindhunter for another connection here. And somehow it ended up in Pellington's hands. And I will say I kind of appreciated his perspective on it, because he does translate it to a kind of slow burn drama, which seems to be either something you like about the movie or something you're frustrated for the movie for doing, because it's taking obviously this premise of this like folklore legend reports, and it's taking it, I think, seriously and literally in a way that genre fans would want, but not delivering on the traditionally exciting sci-fi horror pulp that those same people would probably want out of it. It is instead focused on this really subjective and collective kind of psychological experience, essentially, of just coming to terms with the random chaos of the world around you and death and, that kind of stuff.
There is very little Mothman.
Yeah.
In the Mothman Prophecies.
Almost no Mothman.
Yeah, there is 2 minutes total.
There are a couple of is this Mothman's point of view? Because one of the things that people seem to agree about Mothman is that he flies. Yeah. There are some sort of camera movements that sort of suggest that Mothman is hiding in plain sight, flying around. And there's sort of like Motho-vision, which is very staticky.
But see, I like that stuff. It reminds me of the X-Files. It's what I like about the X-Files, because they don't have the money to show you a giant monster creature, right? So
I was going to say, I'm not making fun of that at all.
Yeah.
Because I think that this movie has a really novel approach to like cryptozoology or American mythology. Remember, this is like, in a way, the X-Files is the exact context for it. But even something like the Blair Witch Project, it's the less is more thing, where it's like, let's assume that the Mothman isn't what makes the movie interesting. As you say, it's about coming to terms with uncertainty, and the use of a journalist as someone who kind of has to learn whether or not he should ask questions or learn whether or not he can verify something. That's the real subject of the movie, more than just how many times could they like show a thing with red eyes floating around in the background. I'm glad that they kept that judicious. I will also say it's my favorite kind of ambient horror where like you don't see the Mothman a lot, but every other shot is like glowing red headlights. You know, or apartment lights flickering through traffic wires. You're like, everything in this movie looks like the Mothman. The whole movie is the Mothman. The world is basically made in the image of the Mothman. It's hard to do that.
It was so funny watching it. I understood exactly. I was like, this is an Adam movie specifically because it takes like a really like a pulpy thriller premise, and it's like, how do we do it in like the way that like Shyamalan would do it, or like something. I thought about The Empty Man a little bit. I was like, this is like Nayman's Register. If you have a brand, I feel like Mothman Prophecies fits into that brand.
The Mothman and the Empty Man are hanging out. You know, Mothman, Empty Man, Shyamalan. When I wrote about this movie on Letterboxd, which is the only place I've written about it, I thought about it with Signs because they came out in the same year. They're very similar movies. They are movies about the universe trying to tell a character something, but Shyamalan, who I say this with as much affection as I can muster, is like kind of a crazy person. I mean, in Signs, it really is like the universe is trying to tell you something, and it's that you can beat the shit out of the alien. And the Mothman Prophecies there's not nearly as much autonomy in what the Richard Gere character can do. He can't stop anything. He just has to accept that
it's a similar rational versus supernatural belief, but it's more about like the monster is less important than just like accepting the mystery in a way, or accepting the fact that you're never going to totally understand or get an explanation or solve it, and you kind of have to learn to live with it.
Yeah, he's kind of like he's a strangely powerless hero or a protagonist. He has the motivation to kind of find out what's going on after he just kind of stumbles into the town, which we can kind of get to. But overall, they never really say if it is like this supernatural effect, simply because like the movie itself says it, but there is this kind of like subjective perspective that seems like an unreliable narrator every once in a while. And like everyone else that is involved, especially once we get to the finale, which is it's all what this movie's kind of leading to, they are unaware of this prophecy or whatever. So to them, it does seem like just a freak accident. And it is interesting to just kind of lock into his specific perspective and then have even all the scenes like when he's getting those phone calls and he's getting the voice that's telling him things and seeing things that only he could see. It feels as if you could easily see that as something that he's experiencing. But it is significant enough for him to warrant this kind of idea that there's a prophecy. Not that like the film pretty much says that there is one and that there's, the universe is speaking to him, but it never does it stray away from that. So I was able to kind of read it that way a little bit, but the
thing I liked about it is that it doesn't matter if it even was real or not, because like he couldn't do anything about it either way.
Yeah.
It's a lesson for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like that there's these kind of the way the camera floats around him. And they outside of these subjective stories, when he starts to interrogate people about like their experiences with the Mothman, the only time that the camera is doing these like floating things and following him is with Gere. And so it does kind of feel like there is a deeper or stronger connection with this character compared to everybody else. The way that he uses that camera movement.
Well, he's got the sensitivity from the loss of his wife.
Now that being said, I do want to just preface up front that I did have a little bit more of a struggle with this one. I like a lot of the style that comes with his movements. Like the guy will do something where Gere is just exiting a police station and he'll like swoop his camera in between walls and just do these elaborate things for almost seemingly no reason other than style, which I really do enjoy. It's just, I guess I was expecting maybe a little bit more of a propulsive nature to it. I found myself to be bored at times, if I could be honest with you, because there's a little bit less of a procedural element and more of him like he's interrogating people and I guess getting more information, but it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't feel as if something is being unraveled a lot of the time. And I guess I feel like I start to feel like its wheels are spinning a little bit, but I don't know. I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on how you view some of the drama mixed with the thriller, I guess.
Well, let's reiterate what Mothman does in this movie.
Sure.
Let's talk about him like he's our friend, you know, the Mothman.
We all love the Mothman.
Mm-hmm. To the extent that he exists, he shows up for a split second and causes Deborah Messing to have a car accident. Which
not very nice.
Which does not kill her, but creates a context in which, you know, there's a tumor that's discovered and she dies, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, you know, Mothman killed my wife. It's like, my wife had a car accident and it's unfortunate. Mothman's not really responsible though. Like his hands are clean. And then he kind of goes to the town, Point Pleasant in West Virginia, which is where the real journalist who this is based on went to. And he kind of is like fucking with people. But it doesn't even seem that he's fucking with people so much as just whatever frequency or dimension or reality he inhabits, when it bleeds over into our own, people become very disoriented. Like, he's not hurting anybody. Mm-hmm. This is very important to note. He's not like haunting people and breaking into their house or abducting them and experimenting on them. Just like him being around means that people go into
telling them
kind
stories.
of like telling them stories. They kind of go into these like fugue states and wander around and get caught in time loops. And I'm not even sure, and I'm maybe speaking up for the Mothman here because I don't want him to come and, you know, haunt me. But it's not remotely clear to me, not like in a movie is incoherent way. I mean, in a movie is interesting way. It's not remotely clear that he causes the bridge collapse. He may just.
I would argue. I don't think he does. I
don't think he
knows,
does.
and he just tells
knows.
You.
And his way of telling, because of whatever interdimensional or multiple reality he occupies, he can't just come out and say it. It's like a radio that's picking up a frequency that can't get it exactly right. The communication is very cryptic. The communication is very uneven. That frustration to me is what's so wonderful about the movie, which is you are just in this kind of weird, contingent, trapped, kind of like uneventful episode of the X-Files, and that's just reality now. And then once you become aware of that, everything is quite strange, you know?
Yeah.
But that bridge collapse, which is an amazing sequence.
It's
like,
incredible.
Yeah, it's great.
It's incredible. It's not it's just a thing that happened. I mean, it's a weirdly documentary moment within the movie, in that this bridge collapse kind of did happen. I think a movie that would sort of cut to the Mothman, you know, cutting the strings to the bridge would be pretty tacky. I mean, I'm being funny here, but I'm trying to sort of vindicate what I think the movie's approach is, which is it takes the Mothman extremely seriously and tries to do that thing that so many made-for-TV movies or movies like The Fourth Kind or Communion or Fire in the Sky do, which is like, man, this totally happened, but then also like really be vague about what it is that happened, much vaguer than these other movies are. It's a funny mix of things, right?
Yeah, but and that's just it. Is I think I would be more annoyed at someone doing that, someone denying you the pleasures of some of the pulpier aspects of this material, if I didn't think he had a pretty strong sense of mood and paranoia and being able to get you into that weird, strange, just confused and downbeat kind of grief-stricken loneliness that he manages to put those two characters through. I mean, specifically Richard Gere and Laura Linney, who had obviously already done a movie together in Primal Fear, which was, I feel like, marked Gere's transition into being the 90s thriller kind of leading man up there with Michael Douglas a little bit after he had obviously had a little bit more of that sort of like hunk appeal, even if he was, you know, still using that to the affected, you know, vision of people like Richard Brooks and Terrence Malick and Paul Schrader earlier in his career. There's a quality, I think, to Primal Fear, where I think, Adam, in your review, you described him as an actor perfectly suited to the throes of slow dawning realization, and I thought that was just an incredibly accurate assessment of what he does in this movie.
He's so good at being like, what does Homer say? Something was said, not good. Like Gere's very, 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 very good at slowly
He's
coming to terms
concentrating
with
on
that.
something ambient off screen that's not good for him. What is it?
and I think that if you've seen Steve Coogan do the impersonation of him on The Trip, which is it's not an extended impersonation, but it's on the short list of the best impressions of any actor I've ever seen. Steve Coogan doing Richard Gere on The Trip. If you're listening to this podcast, Google it. It is like a sublime.
Just pause it and go listen to it. It's so
2
good.
minutes. Go. It's so good. But it's a compliment to Gere because he actually can conjure up that kind of concentration. He gives such a simultaneously concentrated and distracted performance in this movie. And this is a film whose centerpiece, not just within the film, but I mean the ad campaign. Like the high point of this movie is Richard Gere like fingering a tube of chapstick, like that is sort of like the money
and the
shot.
Mothman going chapstick,
which was in all the ads. But that scene with all of
that
this
scene's fantastic though.
It's fantastic. That scene works because of Gere, because he's irritated and he's defiant. And then he's just sort of absolutely terrified. And then he's sort of resigned to the fact that something inexplicable and kind of scary is going on. But he crucially never plays that scene like he's in physical danger. It's like, how quickly can he take this thought experiment with his own suggestibility or his own paranoia? That's a really freaky sequence. And it's a freaky sequence that gives you nothing. Like it gives you absolutely nothing. But it's very
that was
scary.
where the brief moments of like the supernatural dreaminess that sometimes comes up in the style of the movie becomes really effective, because there's times where I think Jamie's right, where they're doing it and you're wondering kind of why they're doing it. You're not sure exactly what it means. He'll just go into this voyeuristic wide angle floating image, or he'll really during like when we hear a lot of the stories, it's done in this really heavy like point of view. There's like a color filter on it, there's some grain to it, and he really does stretch some of the early 2000s aesthetic things. I did look up, shot by Fred Murphy, who had shot Girlfriends for Claudia Wheel, Cue the Winged Serpent for Larry Cohen, worked with John Flynn, Joe Johnston, lots of people. But I think most importantly, Freddy vs. Jason for Ronnie Yu. And a movie that is good looking in despite, or maybe in part because of that like new metal kind of era trashiness of that. And it's also edited by the guy who edited Natural Born Killers and Crank. And part of me kind of goes, I wonder if the movie had more mania of what those guys clearly could offer on a technical level, if I would have been even more into it. But there's brief hints of it, and I think it is deployed in a way where there's moments where you're just like, is this guy in a waking dream? What exactly is happening? And then there's moments where it does actually intersect with the tension of the actual sequence, which is like when he's journalistically testing the other end of the line. Am I speaking to a supernatural being or not? And I think that's one of the better examples in the movie of just that mood really lining up with, the actual appeal of the thriller component of the sequence.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to just say something I did really like about it is the kind of what you were just saying. This it's like, is he living in a dream or something? There's this Silent Hill aspect to it where he just kind of appears in the town. Like it's just like he's driving and then all of a sudden he's just there, and it feels kind of inescapable and surreal. And I do like that the ending does have like the bridge out of town is the very thing that collapses, and it's like to escape this whole connection that he seems to have with the Mothman, which again we're not sure it's like if he represents death or he's actually just kind of warning people about fatality.
I love that whole sequence, that whole lost time thing of like experiencing his wife dying and getting these subtle hints, not subtle hints. He goes to the hospital and she's drawing pictures of the Mothman already and all that kind of stuff. But I just like the idea, like that whole sequence of I'm not even sure how much time has passed. And then all of a sudden he's like, I'm driving to this place, and he ends up in a completely different place, and he doesn't know how he got there. And he goes and he knocks on the door, and you get Will Patton showing up as like the shotgun toting bumpkin, who is like, you've come here 3 nights in a row at 2:30 in the morning, which we haven't seen him do, and he doesn't remember doing. Right. And I feel like just like placing you in that strangeness, this is what I think Pellington does pretty well, is just at least capturing the mood of what it feels like to walk around in this kind of cold, lonely, uncanny kind of place and the rhythms of that. And I feel like that's, for some people, I understand plot wise why it's frustrating, but I do think that in terms of the character experience, it's pretty effective.
Yeah, I'm very fond of how, Will Patton is playing close to a cliche here. He's sort of the rural guy who's kind of driven mad, and he kind of alternates between being really hepped up and then kind of beatific and smiling and sad. But I like how
he's an upstanding member of town.
But I like how very few characters in this movie act like idiots.
Yeah.
Like very few characters act like idiots. It's really restrained on the kind of I have seen weird things and I'm now acting bug nuts and hanging off the ceiling. It's more filled with good actors who seem to be just trying to work through the people they're playing are working through these paradoxes and working through that inexplicability. Like Alan Bates, he's fantastic. He's terrific. Every time you sort of have a character who's trying to talk and think through the implications of these things that they sort of don't understand, and you get this wonderful exchange between Gere and this scientist later in the film. Oh, is he a scientist? He's a researcher, and you get him sort of saying like, we don't know, we're not supposed to know. And you can make great existential comedy out of that in a movie like A Serious Man, or you can treat that like a cliche. But this movie really does get into this sort of slightly disturbing area of like, do you really want to know this stuff? If this stuff is kind of indifferent to us, and if this stuff is sort of beyond us, and it's not really letting us in, and you're almost just picking up frequencies and kind of crossed wires, but reality is bigger and more subdivided than we know, like, you want to know about this? Really? And I think that that's a small but real thing that a movie can do to be frightening, far more than, Mothman jump scares. And I admire that. I think it's not just doing less with more or just a practical matter. I think it's a whole program that the film executes more or less effectively.
Yeah, I am curious.
And having a character actor like that, like deliver those lines in the scared fashion that he does, helps too. But go ahead, Jamie.
I am curious if it's almost like I'm having a little bit of expectation versus just what the film is trying to do, because that does happen every once in a while. I just do feel a little bit of I feel like it's a little bit tedious at a certain point, just because I feel like things don't. And maybe I just need to look through my notes and we can go through a couple more like specific sequences, but it at a certain point it feels like he's getting all this information about like, just these other stories that the townspeople have had with the Mothman or whatever. And he's learning that this is a reality.
The bright flashing light that hits the lovers on Lover's Lane or whatever. And I do like the one that Adam brought up earlier of the camera taking off like it's flying away, and it's like the woman who caught it, or the older man who does like the weird screeching noises over the call that he hears. There's a whole bunch of different people around town who are picking up this frequency.
Yeah, and I guess I just thought at a certain point there would be, I don't know, something more visceral, but I think it is, I guess, just about kind of this like a legend come to life, and it's more like everyone in this certain community thinking and experiencing these things is what is resulting in its kind of power over people, I guess, around the town. Because obviously it's not doesn't seem to be doing a very positive thing. It seems to represent like a bad omen. If it's not giving the bad omen to people, it is at the very least expressing that it's coming or something like that. So I don't know.
Yeah. Although I do think that it's like the sense of, you experiencing death has made you open and sensitive to this frequency is almost kind of how I viewed it as well.
Totally. There is a connection with Gere that seems to occur where it's like he seems hyper connected just because he's also the only death that we see where, or at least his wife is the only death that we see where the Mothman is almost like entirely physically right there. And it's the only sequence, I guess, where you have him like fly into the camera and then she spins out and, she hits her head and everything like that. So it feels like he almost has a deeper connection. Also, it bringing him to the town without him even realizing it. It just, there's a significance to his character compared to everybody else, I guess.
That aspect of bringing him to the town without him realizing it reminded me as if this was like, for middle-aged journalists, this is like Donnie Darko.
Oh, sure.
It's like he has an instinctual pull to just like complete a thing, but he doesn't know exactly
what it is,
what that thing is. You guys are figuring it out.
You guys are slandering my good friend Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold. I don't think Indrid Cold means any harm. I think Indrid Cold is a representative or a manifestation of something, deep and frightening and kind of beyond us. And the best that it can do to relate to us is be like, I know you have chapstick in your drawer, I do
like the idea.
I can see things.
I do like the idea that the Mothman is like, if it's not like this kind of death omen that is bringing it upon people, but almost warning people through this like universal experience. I like that the idea is like he knows about the poor infrastructure of that bridge. It's just letting everybody know that shit's going down, baby. You need repairs.
And I'll say too, I mean, we're not trying to tag team movies on the pod, but the structure of this movie and Richard Gere as a character who kind of becomes like Chicken Little, it really is interesting if you watch Arlington Road. Oh, because one thing that Arlington Road has is it has total plot coherence, where every single thing that happens in retrospect can sort of be tied to like the trick that it's playing on you. So what I will say to Pellington's credit, because after these two films, he has a really strange directorial career, including a film that I have not yet tracked down, but which is apparently just like famously abysmal, called I Melt With You, which is
not a promising title.
It's a story of like four buddies, and it's like just a dark night of the soul or a descent into violence among these friends. I remember it played at festivals and people were like, this is dire.
Okay, well, the three guys are Thomas Jane, Jeremy Piven, and Rob Lowe, so I might have to question your
it's sort of
conclusion.
like a notorious movie. But I will say between Arlington Road and Mothman, I appreciate this very well filigreed kind of paranoia in two totally different directions. Where Arlington Road is like the paranoia is identifiable within about 2 seconds, and every aspect of the movie is leading to this predetermined conclusion, with Jeff Bridges running around trying to warn everybody and no one listening to him. And Mothman Prophecies kind of replicates that, but in a much less plot-driven and much less cause and effect sort of way. It's like an ambient horror movie,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that Gere is so good at that aspect of running around and trying to warn people and no one wants to do anything. And I think he has very good chemistry with Linney. I love that scene where Linney tells him her dream and that she's also reckoning with, she's kind of seeing something and she doesn't know exactly what it means, and the way that her dream of obviously drowning surrounded by these Christmas presents and it doesn't make any sense and she's number 37 and how does this all add up, and the way that satisfyingly fits into the finale of the movie, where you get this fantastic bridge sequence, which is like practically a Final Destination sequence of just like watching time slowing down and
isn't it
the camera flying from the
that does this like to a much more extended
they beat
but
Final Destination to doing a bridge collapse sequence, but but like the just the nuts and bolts detail literally of like the steel creaking and vibrating and the suspension cables breaking and people running around and the cars slamming into each other. It's a really fantastic little mini disaster sequence in the middle of just this sad drama that has nothing else like it in the whole movie. And I think that was what ultimately won me over with the movie, is that the ambient quality that Adam, you're speaking about, I think is strong. But I do feel like the whole time I was like, you need something though. You need to be doing something with this. And this was, for me, it paid off. For me, it got to the end of this and I did go, there's something so interesting about, he can tune into this sensitivity. It's something of a curse that he can do it, and he has to learn to ignore it. There's a really great sequence where he thinks that his wife is going to call him on Christmas Eve, and he goes all the way home to go and get it, and he's waiting for the call, and Laura Linney instead calls him and says, basically kind of delivers him the idea of the movie, which is that it's not going to be her. It's going to be some weird thing being you don't know what it is fucking with you. So your wife is dead. Like planes crash, earthquakes happen, people die. This is what you're ultimately reckoning with. And his decision to be like, I'm going to agree with her, and I'm going to. This is maybe the one argument the Mothman has against Adam's theory, because I'm actually almost fully on your side that the Mothman is just an objective being that transmits things to you, and you can pick them up or you can't. You can do with them what you want. But there is a quality of, was the Mothman trying to prevent him from going to that bridge by tricking him with his wife? I don't know. Either way, he gets over it. He goes, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to travel all the way back to go and connect with Laura Linney, connect with a living, breathing person, not be so isolated and alone anymore. And he gets there in time to prevent her from being the 37th victim in that crash. And I think that is a really, really well sustained sequence, and it is actually well built with the character drama.
Yeah. No, I totally agree that that I think the finale connects everything well. For me, I guess it is 2 hours, and I find that
it is 2 hours.
There is a little bit of, for me, it just weighs it down a tiny bit before that finale hits, and I just think there was a certain point where I went, I get what we're doing here, and I don't think anything else is being revealed through his further phone calls, further interrogations of other Mothman stories, like things like that. I just no,
because it's a movie about a guy in denial,
right,
and just trying to spend the whole movie doing the thing.
Yeah. Totally.
But also,
I get why that would be frustrating. I totally understand.
Yeah. But also a movie that wants to tell you all the weird things that people have sort of implied about the Mothman without showing it or him do any of it, which is sort of like, again, very, very, very perverse.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea, and I like that they chose really to only show the Mothman or ideas of the Mothman in some way for like 2 minutes out of the total runtime. I think that's actually very, very smart, because if it was like a CGI or even a man in a Mothman outfit, I feel like it would totally lose the tone and the consistency of the tone that I think it carries very well.
I'm not going to be able to get that image Adam conjured of it like sawing the suspension.
Yeah, like sawing the cable. Like it's like it turns into that Twilight Zone episode where they got the gremlin on the wing or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, which would be, I mean, that honestly, there's a film there too, but it definitely wouldn't match the style and the music video kind of thing that Pellington's doing. So I get it. I guess I'm wrestling with a couple things. I feel like it
kind of depends what you want at the movie. Do you want it to be knowing? Do you want it to have that Nick Cage Googling 9/11 and watching a plane crash and being in the visceral plane crash? Or, in my opinion, this is kind of operating more in a register I'd compare to something like, I don't know, like Larry Fessenden's what's that one we covered with Wendigo?
Oh,
Wendigo.
Yeah, totally.
That's something I was kind of thinking about a little bit while watching this, where you get that folklore legend, but it's kind of avoiding showing you exactly what it is, but it's also a manifestation of an emotional experience and psychological experience the characters are going through. Yeah. And I think I just quickly kind of picked up on that's what this movie was going to be. And so by the time it was delivering a final destination bridge sequence, I was like, that's icing.
Oh yeah, that was sick. And I have to say the examples, like the way that they used I think it might have been miniatures. I'm not totally sure, but there's a lot of detail when it comes to like the crumbling of the cement and the bridge going on both sides and the cars diving into the water, and it is like a truly crazy 15-minute final sequence.
Great.
Yeah, incredible overhead shot. Again, very Mothman coded with all the red, but of all the headlights in the water.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a horrific vision that is not just scary, but it's quite sad. You know.
Yeah, the fact that they give you that number of, like 36 people died still, by the way. I know you did like this moment of heroism where you overcame your grief and you go and saved a woman, but like this was still a horrible thing that happened.
And I mean, I'm always a fan of movies that end with like a title card sort of, they're like, the Mothman was never seen in Point Pleasant again, which is why I want to just pitch a series of films where he just is in different towns. Just Indrid Cold showing up and going through people's personal effects. I would watch it. I don't know what the real box office potential of this is, but I'm in. I'm in for him going.
Depends on if they can maintain that feel bad mood that it kind of.
I want it to be like that show
mood you've been discussing,
like that show Poker Face with Natasha Lyonne, except it's Indrid Cold going from place to place and just like haunting people and asking what they've got in their bag. I think that would be a really just good
until one final
series.
Destination finale.
Yeah, until finally someone doesn't have the chapstick and he's like, shit. That's what I'm waiting for.
I do love that it also ends with like I think you were just mentioning it, but the caption that was like, you know, to this day we don't know what happened to the bridge or why it collapsed. And if you go just on the wiki, which is funny, they're just like, it actually was found to be caused by the failure of an eye bar in a suspension chain in 1971. And I just like it's very funny to me that they still kind of were like, we're going to 1960s.
They didn't know that bridges could just fall.
But anyway,
it was the Mothman. Okay,
I get why
he was blamed.
Yeah, and honestly, obviously, they can't just put that in the little finale credit. That would really take away the entire horrifying finale here. But I just thought it was funny.
Richard Gere was just crazy the whole time.
Yeah, he was crazy. There was really just bad infrastructure. That's all that happened.
But it did lead him to participate in a very small and coincidental act of heroism. So
yes,
it's all fine.
And you know what? Overall, 36 better than 99, which was the prophecy. So numbers game.
Yeah. But yeah, if we're pivoting towards reductive rating on this one got a solid 3 for me. I did find it actually fairly effective, but I think it was because I was able to calibrate my brain to what this movie was going to be. Mm-hmm. I part of the style choices did make me wonder, was there a pulpier version of this material? I mean, even something, if you want it, Communion. I did think about the fact that this is, Communion also is indulging in a very strange, dramatic seriousness with the material, but like this is the version of Communion that like doesn't show you the alien abduction and the probing. Which maybe that sounds like a worse movie to you, or the high fives. He didn't high five the Mothman either, but so again, I do see how people could find it slow and frustrating that it does decide that it wants to focus on this very subjective and psychological experience of a character, emotionally and psychologically just coming to terms with, the random nature of the world around them and the senseless tragedy of it. And I do think that for the most part, it indulges in a very similar rational versus supernatural mood that you would find in something like The X-Files. And I do think that The X-Files was also frequently very good at being like, solving or explaining the monster is a lot less important than the actual mystery itself, and engaging in that kind of, the occasional burst of supernatural dreaminess that you have to just accept you'll never completely understand. And I think it's used as a good gateway towards the fact of the emotional and the depressed perspective of this character, of being like, he's confused and he's grief stricken and he's looking for answers. And the answer is not to let the Mothman pretend to be your wife and call you and fuck with you, which he may or may not be doing. It is to live with the people who are still around you. And the Mothman does effectively help him through transmission, at least save a person. Maybe he'll go through and he'll spend multiple sequels saving more people. But until he does that, there's just something, I don't know. I kind of agreed with Adam's review when he wrote about it. There's something kind of cold and lonely and dreamy about the movie in terms of the just ambient mood of it. And I do think that the fact that you want to compare it to something like Shyamalan or The Empty Man or Donnie Darko or Wendigo speaks to the register I think that it's working on. And even if, it's still made by people who worked on things like Freddy vs. Jason and Crank, and it has some trashier elements to some of the 90s music video style and aesthetic choices, I think they're pretty well deployed in terms of getting that supernatural quality and that strangeness into your brain. And I do think it very much does build to a bravura bridge collapsing sequence that is cathartically in line with what it's doing with the characters and everything like that. So 3 for me.
Yeah, I'm still crossed. I'm in like that. It's like low 3 or high 2 for me. I'm still unsure, to be honest. It's like I really do like the style. I think that what he does to kind of capture this mood and tone and keep it completely consistent, especially with something that could be very ridiculous. Again, I'm glad that he didn't, show the Mothman very often. Really, the biggest glimpse that you get of him is at the very beginning when the wife dies, and he kind of like, you have this one shot of him kind of diving towards the car, and that is probably the most you see of him. The rest of it is done through symbolism or through like a POV or this kind of implication through floating camera. So I think that's smart. I do think that that's the way to go about it. Focus it on Gere and focus it on his kind of grieving process and his maybe kind of surreal, maybe even unreliable narrative in a way, just because it's coming from his subjective viewpoint. There's a lot of good in that. I do like it. It's just, as the movie goes, I just find it to be, as it unravels the legend of the Mothman, I just found it to be kind of tedious eventually, and I was waiting for where it leads. And I will happily say I think that where it leads is great. The finale where, the prophecy kind of comes to fruition, and he's seeing the death, and like, the cables start to unwind and break, and you get this huge Final Destination kind of finale, I think is awesome. And he gets a chance to kind of redeem himself. It is funny to think again that 36 people still died for this like one guy to kind of get over his grief, but I don't think that that's
but that's what you have to accept. Death happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just
listen to the Mothman.
And I do like the idea that the Mothman again is not like, because when I was watching it, I did more have the idea that, because it presents itself in this horror tone, that the Mothman is, kind of putting these things into motion. But I do like the idea that it could be this entity that's warning you about death and bad infrastructure. So I think that is an interesting thought, and I would honestly like to maybe just watch it in that perspective a little bit more. But and I do also, the other thing I wanted to mention was I really do like the Silent Hill aspect of it, of like him just stumbling into the town and kind of being forced to deal with his grief, and him like that element of it does make it a little bit more detached from any real like a reality that you have to kind of have like rules that go along with it or something like that. I think that it allows itself to be more abstract in the moments it wants to be. So there's a lot of stuff I like in here. I guess as I was watching it, I felt it. I felt the time a little bit and until that finale hit. So still wrestling with it a little bit, but yeah.
For you, Adam.
3.5, and then I'm going to give an extra half star for my friend Indrid Cold. I don't want to run afoul of the Mothman. No, what I would say, the high compliment that I would give it, and it's not an obsessive thing, but I feel it is within spitting distance, not formally but thematically, of Don't Look Now, which is my favorite movie. Which is the idea that the universe, and in this case it is a
listeners of this show will know, go back.
Yeah, it's a filmic universe, and controlled by Mark Pellington and his collaborators. The movie is trying to tell him something, and the substance of what it's trying to tell him, to me, is less important than the telling. It's the receptivity to it. We've talked about this on your wonderful pod before, but Don't Look Now is all about how you have to pay attention to the movies you watch. And when you watch movies, they become a kind of a reality for those 2 hours. I love the reality or the texture of the world in the Mothman, where you start becoming suspicious of traffic lights, where you're like, have I knocked on this door before? Or who's on the other end of the phone? That's a really fun space to be in a movie. And then the payoff, which is that what the whole movie's been trying to tell you, is that this bridge is going to collapse, and is going to collapse in the image of a lot of what we've looked at before. A small but potent kind of little satisfaction. I also like how obscure and disposable the movie is. Like it kind of came out. It was one of the first movies I ever reviewed for an alt weekly, for iWeekly. I skipped my English class to go review this movie. I think I gave it like 3 stars for iWeekly at the time. I'm just very fond of this period of like slightly eccentric, self-contained, non-IP based studio horror movies, you know, shot on film that are 2 hours long. I feel very cranky when I say this, but we need to we need to go back.
Yeah.
You know, we need to go back. In a week where I've read the dumbest reviews possible of The Woman in the Yard, future candidate for this pod, and a very good film. You know,
Very excited to watch it.
People can't watch a decent horror movie if it smacks them in the face. So I hope a couple people who listen to this pod feel like seeking out the Mothman Prophecies and have like a pretty okay time watching it. You know, like a good 3.5 star early aughts studio genre picture.
Yeah, that is something that I do like about like watching these kind of films too. Is it does feel like you don't see them made like this anymore, and whether that is subjective view of whether that's good or bad, I guess. But I do think that there's a particular style here that is very of its time, and I do miss it. I agree.
Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for the Mothman Prophecies and for this week's episode. That was once again Seven from 1995 and Mothman Prophecies from 2002. Thanks so much, Adam, for joining us and for bringing these films on with you. Is there anything that before you head out here that you want to plug? Is there any new writing? Is there a new book you can mention? Anything like that? Obviously, everyone should be buying the David Fincher book. We'll have a link to it in the description already.
I'm not gonna say what the new book is about yet because that's contingent on me actually finishing it, but I will have a piece out at the end of the month for the New Republic on David Cronenberg's sublime and beautiful and humane new film, The Shrouds, which will probably be the best movie I see this year. I reserve the right to be surprised and have my mind changed, but I like that movie a lot, and I hope that people go see it because it's getting a release via Sideshow, and it's being released more as an art film, and Crimes of the Future didn't do very well. So I hope people turn up for Cronenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, support Cronenberg, support the Canadians. Jamie and I saw it at TIFF last year, and we had a good time with it as well. Everyone should be going and checking it out for sure.
Canadian excellence.
Yes.
Absolutely. For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time where we're going to be over on the Patreon feed where we're going to be talking about two 1975 Charles Bronson movies celebrating their 50th anniversary. This year, we're going to be talking about the debut film of Sleazoids legend Walter Hill, with his movie Hard Times, with Charles Bronson as a bare-knuckle boxer in the olden times. And then we're going to be also pairing it with a movie called Breakheart Pass, which the best way I can describe it to you is that it's like a Civil War era Western where Charles Bronson is sort of investigating a murder mystery on like a train, like Agatha Christie style, but is also getting into fistfights atop the train and all kinds of crazy like cavalry Western action sequences by the end of the movie as well. So Charles Bronson, 1975, that's next week on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed, we are going to be back with a special guest where we are going to be doing a double feature I'm so excited about because I have no idea what these movies are. We're going to be talking about a movie called Closed Circuit from 1978 and a movie called Rapture or Arabetto from 1979. And from what I could tell, the connection between these two films is a kind of meta quality about characters who love cinema and are involved in cinema in some capacity. The first movie looks like it's like a crime movie or a thriller, and the second one looks like some kind of strange fantasy drama horror film that I don't know exactly how to describe to anyone, and I haven't seen either, so I can't sell you guys too much on them other than I trust that our guest has picked some cool movies. So
sweet,
and that's what you can expect in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.